be a part of the oceans and sky. When I was young, before my life, I was a part of the oceans and sky.
Welcome back. You're watching or listening to the Sheep Farm Meet the Flockers presentation, which is episode 6 of the Huxley's Brave New World Order series. Due to the length of this episode and the density of detail, we'll break it down into 2 parts, approximately 2 hours long each. That will mean the Orwell/Mockingbird series will take up approximately 10 hours of this Brave New World Order series alone. In the Mockingbird episodes, we've been digging into the life and background of George Orwell, and this has become a series within a series. The first 2 contained information about Orwell's intelligence connections and his wives and his friends. These 2 episodes will cover Orwell's bloodlines. This episode has taken me several months to put together. Just a couple of things before we begin. A presentation version will be initially released on YouTube. It will be beneficial to watch this first. Reason being, I have inserted reference images with information like genealogy charts and screenshots to back up the evidence. Also, I noticed through the first hour after recording, I've been getting my descendants and ancestors mixed up, and also a few pronunciation errors. I do apologise. I'll try and sort this for the remainder of the podcast. What I wanted to achieve with the information in this episode was to show examples of who shares the genealogy with Sir Julian and Aldous Huxley, Sir Charles Darwin, and the person of interest in this presentation, George Orwell. In hour 2, we get into the bones of Orwell's genealogy, so to speak. Please bear in mind that the Prime Ministers, Presidents and other leaders I use as examples were just a snapshot of the people with royal ancestry. I will probably be doing a show on its own at some point just about the ancestry of our supposed organic leaders and influential people. Remember, all this information used in this presentation is out there in the mainstream, and it's only when we see it all together as a full mosaic that we realise that these characters are part of an organised, orchestrated effort to control the world's populations. In the last 2 episodes, we've been digging into the life of George Orwell, and this is the 3rd and last part of the series, within a series called Mockingbird. I planned that Orwell would appear in episode 3 and take up about 30 minutes, but that went down the sewer quite early on. With me today, as usual, is our Chris. So I'm going to crack on because there's a lot to go through here. We're probably going to have to break this into 2 episodes on its own, I think, if it goes the way I think it's going to go. George Orwell deserves, in our opinion, this in-depth look. And this episode will give us a sense of his genealogy and his ancestors. I make no apologies for the amount of detail in this presentation. It is very detail-dense. I'll probably repeat a few things. Chris will go over a few things as well, a few times as well, because we need to tie in all the information. Also, it's important to repeat this information because this presentation is long, and we will, and you will, forget things as well. Research is research. You find things that you don't know, so it's not like you knew all this stuff. What you're trying to do is piece it all together.
Well, you find things that you're interested in, don't you? And you've got a clear interest in genealogy.
Yeah.
So that takes you down that path, doesn't it?
It does. It does take you down that path. And we can never take anything for granted. And anyone who says that this or that is 100% correct or the fact or whatever, they're talking nonsense. A door should always be left open, even if you think it's the truth, because things change and other information becomes apparent or what have you. But it's still difficult not to become dogmatic in your views.
But that's the problem with the worldfire, isn't it? At the moment.
Yeah.
People that is unwilling to let go of things that they believe in.
That is living in reality, isn't it? Living in reality means that it can change. And because it can change, and that's what the oppressors use. They use the fact that it can change by inventing false change, don't they? Things, lies that aren't really the change of the screensaver.
Well, look at Darwin came up with this theory, God knows how many years ago, and now that's still a theory, and no one's allowed to question it. Yeah. Even though he was just apparently, although we're no different, one man, and he came up with this theory, and we're still going on about it because he wrote a book about it. So that's it.
Well, I mean, how many of these theories are there? I mean, Einstein's theory, all these theories are what they are. The theories, it's not reality.
No.
And we live our lives. We're ruled. We're controlled by all these theories.
I mean, Stephen Hawking's black hole theory. He didn't even have any visual proof.
No.
It's just a theory. Literally, I mean, I'm sure I'll get shouted down for that, but I'm not believing in these black holes.
No.
And just because James Webb's took a picture of one with his telescope.
Yeah. And because our friend Brian Cock goes on about it.
Tells us so. Yeah.
Yeah, because he's got a graph in his pocket that he can pull out at any time he wants to. It's always interesting, though, to find out new information. Not just because it proves that you're wrong or your thoughts have been wrong, but just it's new information. That's probably what excites me more than anything in research, is finding new information that brings a number of subjects together. So you can find one piece of information that brings several subjects at once together. A bit like this. On 17th of September, more or less, 200 years ago, Darwin, in 1835, Darwin disembarked from the HMS Beagle in the Galapagos Islands, where Darwin discovered, funny word discovered, even though they were already there, 4 types of mockingbirds. He was quoted in an article saying, "My attention was first thoroughly aroused by comparing together the various specimens of the mocking thrush." In the article, the writer said, arguably, these birds had a greater influence than any other organism on the initial development of Darwin's concept of natural selection. Interesting. Isn't it interesting that Operation Mockingbird was, or still is, used to infiltrate the mass media, which is then aimed into the unsuspecting minds of the world's population to divert our attention away from the truth, which is what we were just talking about. Darwin did that by saying he discovered birds that were already discovered. People ask me, what does this type of research mean? And we get asked quite a bit that. What does it all mean? And it's a difficult question to answer. There is no exact answer. And sometimes, sadly, we don't know the answer. We'll never get the answer. But we can see the information there, and we can see that we're being told a lie. And to me, that's just as important, or nearly as important, as finding the answer to most things.
Yeah.
We do have to read between the lines as well, on occasions. Always remembering that opinions are not the truth. Neither are facts, but we can hypothesize in between the lines and come up with various, again, theories. But they are theories. What we can say is that definitely happened, and that was caused by this, for argument's sake. Life is not black and white. That's the programming. The programming is black and white. life is grey as well. Reality and truth live more probably in the grey zone than in the black and white. The grey zone is the matrix, the zeros and ones of the digital parasite world. And yes, it includes all the royal families, all the ancient bloodlines, ultra-muddied elites, regardless of religions or allegiances to different countries. Something we talk about quite a bit, that, isn't it, Chris? That allegiances to different countries, religion, it's irrelevant. Why would Saudi Arabia buy weapons from a Christian country if that were the case?
Yeah.
It
Like we said before,
make sense.
Like what's his name said, just look at the outfits of all the military. They're all exactly the same all over the world. Who came up with the flag system? You know, why has everyone got
innit?
Yeah. Now why has everyone got a flag? And why has everyone got money that looks virtually the same but not quite? Everyone's got the same military order and the same hierarchy, everything.
Same legal systems, sort of similar legal systems.
There is no countries, is there?
No.
That's one thing I believe anyway. Whether I'm right or not, I don't know.
Well, it's not whether we believe it or not. It's quite bloody obvious that you've got a corporal in the British Army, and American Army, and Russian Army, and whatever army are the same. The police force in Russia, Czechoslovakia, and Australia are the same.
All the religions are the same, really. When you strip it back, got the same hierarchy in religion.
Yeah.
Same priesthood.
Yeah. What we're seeing, as I said in this research, is the black, the white, the grey, and we're seeing the zeros and ones of the matrix. Sam, who's sends me quite a bit of information, once said to me, the Muslims are extremely proud of Queen Elizabeth being directly related to the Prophet Muhammad. You never hear about this in the Anglosphere, though. Anyone can all trace themselves back to Babylon and beyond, where history meets mythology. I've long thought that the divine right to rule they claim with the blue blood, etc., is because they know they're descendants of the gods, demigods, Anunnaki, etc., etc., etc. Whatever any of that Prometheus, whatever any of that means, that they can trace their lineage back to these ancient gods or whatever it was that where we came from. An example of this is a chap called Richard of Coinsborough, 3rd Earl of Cambridge. You might know him, Chris.
I know.
Born 20th of July 1385, died 5th of August 1415. Coinsborough was the second son of Edmund of Langley, 1st Duke of York, and his wife Isabella of Castile, Duchess of York. Richard of Coinsborough, 3rd Earl of Cambridge, was a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. He was a descendant via Abid I, who was the founder of the Habadid dynasty. He was the first independent Muslim ruler of Seville. He was a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. Abad I's granddaughter, Zaida, married King Alfonso VI, Spanish King of Leon and Castile. 2 centuries later, Maria de Padilla, a descendant of King Alfonso and Zaida, had 4 children with King Peter of Castile, 2 of whom married sons of King Edward III of England. Isabella of Castile was the wife of Edmund of Langley, 1st Duke of York. She gave birth to Richard Coinsborough, Richard of Coinsborough, who became the first the Earl of Cambridge. The controversial Earl of Cambridge later fathered the Duke of York, Richard Plantagenet. Plantagenet fathered Edward IV, King of England, who ruled from 1547 to 1553. The Plantagenet DNA runs thick through many of the British aristocratic families. If you remember, we mentioned the Earl of Loudoun, if you remember that, Chris, in the Jim Morrison episode. The earldom is linked to the Plantagenets, which possibly mean Jim Morrison is a possible distant Plantagenet relation as well, via the Lords of Loudoun, who was the chief of Clan Crawford. Morrison's great-grandmother, Claudia Crawford, was a Crawford from the Scottish bloodline. And who, funnily enough, is the current incumbent Duke of York? None other than Epstein Island visitor Prince Andrew. As you will see, Orwell's bloodline is fascinating because his lineage is cut from similar cloth. The Huxley's links are also awash with Plantagenet bloodlines. As it turns out, the man who set the scene for the mid-1800s for the eugenics reset operation, yes, the king of genes himself, Charles Darwin, was actually genetically related to King Edward III via 21 different lines. Julian and Aldous Huxley, via their mother, Julia Arnold Huxley, was also directly related to King Edward III. Their grandfather, Thomas Huxley, was known as Darwin's bulldog. The man we're talking about in this episode of Brave New World Order, George Orwell, he was related to King Edward III via at least 8 different lines back to Edward III. So just in this little section, we have Darwin, Thomas Huxley, mentor of H.G. Wells. So Julian Huxley, co-founder and president and director of the World Wildlife Foundation, founder of UNESCO and director of UNESCO, president and vice president of the British Eugenics Society. H.G. Wells taught Aldous Huxley, who went on to teach George Orwell at Eton. All apart from H.G. Wells, they are related by blood and marriage and both. The coincidences are off the charts. Did they know that they were all related? Have they been told this? What do you think, Chris?
I don't know. I mean, we've talked about this before. Do they know? Are they those little, like we've talked about, the little bastard sons of the kings that they just drag out, and they need to have that bloodline? I mean, there has to be a level of sympathy for them. I don't. Is it just this limited group of bloodlines that run everything? I would hazard a guess.
They choose certain people from this bloodline, don't they? It's like they've gone through some kind of psychological evaluation because they've got to pick the right person who's going to follow the plan through.
And
Like
going back
Boris
into
Johnson.
history, like now, a lot of them were authors, weren't they, or involved in the arts, because that's what influences people. You could go back to even, if you go right back to Greek times, for instance, they'd use plays to influence people. They didn't have TVs, obviously, but they had books and stuff. But they'd do plays, wouldn't they, that were propagandizing people into wars and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that'd inspire them to take the direction they wanted to. And it's the same thing, innit, right up to now. But now it's TV and cinema and music more. But these people were using their influence with books and the arts, basically.
Yeah. I mean, my view is that it's very hard not to imagine that these people knew. It's like going to school, isn't it? If we went to school and out of class or whatever 30, 10 people were all related back to one particular person in history. It'd be quite odd, that, wouldn't it? And yet, when we look at these people, and this is a smaller pool because these are all authors, for argument's sake, it's not like a mixed class. Yet all these people go back to Edward III or a certain point in time. That can't happen by coincidence. That doesn't mean to say that these people knew it. That mean that you'd struggle to. It's a bit like Dave McGowan's book, isn't it? That all them people just turned up in Laurel Canyon, and all of them became famous stars.
Yeah.
The probability of that happening is off the charts. Well, it just can't happen, can it?
No.
That's like winning the lottery 25 times. You know what I mean? It's just never going to happen.
Yeah. If you're famous and you've got influence, you're there for a reason, aren't you? And chances are, going by what you look into, your bloodline.
Yeah. Well, it's a bloodline. It's the successful peasant scenario, whatever it might be. But somewhere down the line, they've chosen someone from some sort of psychological analysation of them, if that's a word. So whether they knew it or not, it has to be organised in some way, either energetically or strategically put in place. That these people just come together. Maybe they're attracted like magnets. I don't know. Orwell has Plantagenet blood via Sir Richard Plantagenet. He was born 1411 to 1460, and Anne of York, Duchess of Exeter, aka Anne Plantagenet, and Constance of York, Countess of Gloucestershire, aka Constance Plantagenet. The only daughter of Edwin of Langley, 1st Duke of York, and his wife Isabella of Castile, daughter of King Peter of Castile, who I mentioned earlier. So is Orwell related to the Prophet Muhammad? It certainly seems that way via Constance Plantagenet. Did Orwell know this when he went to Spain to supposedly fight in the Spanish Civil War? Well, that's another odd occurrence, isn't it? That he goes there and is possibly related to a relation of a king of Spain. Anyway, I didn't look into that. Why isn't this talked about, though, in the mainstream? Why aren't people... I've heard a lot about Orwell. We've heard a lot about his books. And we've heard some about his history, and I've certainly learnt a lot while I've been doing this. But even in the books, I've never heard him say that he's related to all these people.
Yeah, no mention.
Why isn't it mentioned? The reason it's not mentioned is because it's the key that unlocks the door. This information isn't meant to be found or shown to the masses, let alone discussed, because it shows something bigger, more powerful is at large. A pattern that keeps replaying over and over again, and I'll say it again. Charles Darwin, Sir Julian and Aldous Huxley and Orwell all share the lineage back to Edward III as a common ancestor. The Huxleys were also from a Plantagenet lineage via Thomas of Woodstock,
Interesting.
Duke of Gloucester, very interesting, a.k.a. Thomas Plantagenet, 1355 to September 8th or 9th, 1397. Thomas Plantagenet was the youngest child of Edward III, King of England, and Philippa of Hainault. I found this Thomas of Woodstock DNA link to the Huxley brothers more than interesting. Aldous being the pusher of LSD, involved in the CIA parasite orchestrated hippie movement. LSD was the 60s counterculture drug of choice, and the Woodstock Music Festival, held during August 15th to August 18th, 1969, being the epicenter of the use of LSD, and the CIA and other intelligence agencies using this drug in MK Ultra mind control. So if we add into the mix Sir Julian Huxley, who came up with the name and methodology of transhumanism, we have a huge coincidence. So here we have Julian and Aldous being descendants of Thomas of Woodstock, Duke of Gloucester, Earl of Essex, Earl of Buckingham, aka Thomas Plantagenet, who was born in Woodstock on 7th of January 1355. He was a 66th Knight of the Garter, just like Blair. Thomas Plantagenet's father was Edward III, King of England. The odds of this being another coincidence are off the charts. There's a lot of these coincidences, Chris, isn't there? Ethelred the Unready, King of England, is said to have held an assembly at Woodstock, at which he issued a legal code. The Domesday Book of 1086 describes Woodstock as a royal forest. King Ethelred II, as we shall see, is linked to Orwell. Woodstock Palace was a royal residence in the English town of Woodstock, Oxfordshire, the birth of Edmund of Woodstock, 1st Earl of Kent, the 6th son of King Edward I, and the second by his wife Margaret of France, and a younger half-brother of King Edward II. Edward of Woodstock, known in history as the Black Prince, born 1330, would have been Edward IV's eldest son, and heir apparent to Edward III. The Black Prince died before his father, so his son, Richard II, succeeded him to the throne. Darwin and the Huxley brothers, Orwell, are ancestors of Edward III, I'll keep saying it, and the Plantagenets, so all the way back through history. James VI was King of Scotland, and he was also James I, King of England and Ireland. From the union of the Scottish and English crowns, his mother was Mary Queen of Scots. Tony Blair is a direct descendant of Robert Stewart, half-brother of Mary Queen of Scots, and uncle to James the sixth and first of England and Ireland. There will be more details on this later in the presentation, which I found an interesting link, because that could connect all these people together with Tony B. Lyer. Others who share this Plantagenet Edward III lineage, who have appeared in this series so far, are Anthony Blunt, the Soviet double agent spy we mentioned, I think, in the second episode, but it might have been the third anyway. I've lost track. H.P. Lovecraft, we'll come back to him in a sec. Me and Chris will have a chat about him. T.S. Eliot, the poet and member of the Bloomsbury Group with Aldous. US President Herbert Hoover, who we mentioned in episode 3, possible relation of Jim Morrison. Novelist Mary Augusta Ward, who was an Arnold. She was Mary Augusta Arnold, sister of Julia Arnold, mother of Sir Julian and Aldous Huxley. Matthew Arnold, born 1822, poet, uncle of Julia, their grandfather was Thomas Arnold of Rugby School, who we mentioned, who invented sports in stadiums.
Stadium sport,
yeah. Also, Charles Darwin is a Plantagenet, born 1809, founder of biology. The Huxley family are married into the Darwins. Oscar Wilde, Francis Bacon, we mentioned all these people. And Margaret Thatcher, who also comes from the Plantagenet lineage. William Wilberforce of Beverley in Hull also shares Edward III lineage via John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, an English royal prince, son of Edward III, by his wife Blanche of Lancaster. A lot of these people go back through John of Gaunt's lineage. Also on the same lineage is Baron Werner von Braun. The Bush family, including George Sr. and Jr. and Jeb, etc., they were all from this lineage. Interestingly, George Sr. was knighted by the Queen when she was alive and given the title the Most Honourable Order of the Bath. That was an honourable knighthood. So Dwight D. Eisenhower was also knighted with the same knighthood. And
chivalry.
Followed this... Pardon?
For chivalry, yeah.
Yeah, for chivalry. Yeah. And followed this bloodline via his wife, Mammy Eisenhower, born in 1896, wife of the US President Dwight D. Eisenhower, a descendant of Edward I. So she was also Plantagenet. Edward III was the grandson of Edward I. General Douglas MacArthur, US military leader in World War II and the Korean War, and George S. Patton, born 1885, another army general, famous army general, were from the same Plantagenet lineage of Edward III. Also given an honorary knighthood was Sir Ronald Reagan. He was also given the Most Honourable Order of the Bath. And an interesting footnote, Nancy Reagan, born Anne Frances Robbins in 1921, also shares the Plantagenet and Edward III lineage from her mother, the actress Edith Prescott Luckett. And she doubles this up with ancestry back from King Henry I, from her father, Kenneth Seymour Robbins. She had a very interesting story, not that it's anything to do with this. It's strange how all these people are all intertwined. Again, coming back to American presidents and British prime ministers, all these people in one position to have the same lineage, unless that's been chosen, that is impossible.
Yeah.
Let's come back to H.P. Lovecraft.
Well, I got a book bought of his for my birthday by my mate Butler. One of those nice folio books. And he's another one, isn't it, who's influential right up to now, who apparently created modern fantasy and horror. He's another one of them, like H.G. Wells' science fiction. He's the horror guy, innit? And they're still making films of his now. And you have to ask yourself, I don't know, is there some reason that we're still talking about? I mean, his stories are good as well, by the way. They're a bit like Edgar Allan Poe-ish kind of thing. But if you look on his wiki, it says that he died and no one knew who he was and all this stuff. But he had quite a good job. They have to sell this story that they were down and out and they had no money and all this stuff. But he had quite an influential job because he's accused now of being a racist. I don't know if he was a racist, but he was against American slang. He wanted to keep the English language alive in America. And he was also an advocate of the First World War and said that America should get involved because England's their actual homeland. So he believed. But an interesting character because he's, like I said, he's another one. He's not quite as well known, I wouldn't say, as like your Huxleys and your George Orwell. But he's still one of those characters, I would say.
Yeah, one thing I think we found out in this, most of these people were highly skilled. It's a bit different today where you've got the Sam Smiths and Ed Sheerans and all this type of thing, Madonna and people like that, and Kylie Minogue, where they haven't actually got talent. Posh Spice can't sing, Spice Girls can't sing. They're all
Kylie
mime
Minogue can
artists.
sing, can't you? Can't you?
Is that what you call it?
I don't know.
But what I mean by that is they're not highly talented people. Kylie Minogue is not the equivalent of Aretha Franklin.
No, not at all.
From a singing point of view.
No.
And so the talent's been drained out now, and these people are talented, but the difference was they had to be talented because people could read.
Yeah. As an interesting side note, both of his parents got committed into a loony bin.
Right.
No real, I couldn't really see any reason why. I think his dad was murmuring madness, which is interesting considering the books he writes. He's the one who invented the Chichulu, you know, that big squid-headed monster that you see.
Right.
You see that symbology, you see it popping up everywhere, don't you? Even now.
Well, there we go again. If it's continued to be used like 1984, and all these books were used by the intelligence agencies, why wouldn't that be used?
He created his own H.P. Lovecraftiverse, I suppose, before it were even a thing, where all these monsters existed in his own little world.
And also, going back to his parents being committed, there seems to be a thread running of mental illness through a lot of these people.
Yeah, even going up to Johnson's.
Even going up to Johnson's mother. A lot of these people seem to have some sort of trauma within that family. Is it the deal they've signed? Is it I don't know. Is there something they've sold out?
I mean, in them days, were they just more ready to commit people? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. They seem ready now. On a news blog, just to carry on the ray gun story, on a news blog called upi.com, according to their archive story from May 6, 1984, an article about Reagan's genealogy said, Hugh Prescott, Burke's Peerage chief genealogist known as the Sherlock Holmes of ancestor tracing, spent 3 years checking records in Ireland, England and the United States to find the proof. The proof was found in an ancient document in England that makes Reagan a relative of Britain's Queen Elizabeth II and related to most of the crowned heads of Europe, including the ruling monarchs in Spain, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg and Liechtenstein. He is also related to the dethroned royals of Russia, Italy, Austria, Greece, Romania and Bulgaria. The common link is the greatest of Irish kings, Brian Boru, who saved his country from the Vikings in the 11th century. Queen Elizabeth and King Charles III are descended from the High King, or High King of Ireland, King Brian Boru, who ruled Ireland from 1002 to 1014, facing his downfall in the Battle of Clontarf. Interestingly, this is where it all the jigsaw puzzles seem to come together. Another Orwell connection we mentioned earlier, Cyril Connolly, MBE or CBE, and we mentioned him a number of times throughout the Mockingbird series. If you remember, he was the founder and editor of the intelligence art magazine Horizon. Via Connolly's maternal ancestry, the Vernon family, they actually owned Clontarf Castle in Dublin, Ireland. The area is a famous location for the Battle of Clontarf in 1014. Clontarf was subsequently held by the Knights Templar, and after their suppression in 1308, it was passed over to the Knights Hospitaller. Orwell's second wife, Sonia Bromwell, worked at Horizon magazine and the Information Research Department, the IRD, a propaganda department in the British Foreign Office, if you remember, was going through all that. Remember, Sonia sold the rights also, or took Animal Farm, to the CIA. The deal resulted in the creation of the propaganda film Animal Farm in 1954. Irish High King Brian Boru is also connected to the O'Kennedy family and Tony B. Lyer, as we shall see further into this presentation. Just to finish off this section of the presentation, two other US presidents share the same Edward III DNA. One is Richard Nixon and the other is Gerald Ford. And lastly, we have John D. Rockefeller, who is also of Edward III and part of the Plantagenet gene pool. All of these individuals, and there are many more, share not only Edward III, but Edward II and Edward I, obviously. Grandad and great-granddad. There are many more, which will probably make a whole show of its own when I get round to doing it. It's interesting, isn't it, Chris, that, again, we keep saying this, that you've got Boris Johnson, Tony Blair, David Cameron. You've got Margaret Thatcher. Now, they're 4 prime ministers. In between that, you've got John Major, May, Brown, and now we've got rat ears. Yeah? So 5 out of 4, and I think Major had lineage back through a royal lineage as well. It's not somebody I've really looked at, but I think he has. So 5 out of 4 prime ministers have got royal lineage. Of the last...
You're on about Reagan. I mean, I was just thinking he was clearly used for a purpose, wasn't it? Was that the beginning of the demise of America? Because, I mean, if you're looking at him thinking he should run the country, I mean, that's the beginning. He was the first one, really, wasn't he? That was, you would say...
you could say the demise started after the JFK killing.
Yeah.
And everyone after that. But then you look at Roosevelt, and Roosevelt were obviously planted. Teddy Roosevelt was obviously planted, you know, so...
But I mean,
JFK was planted.
Reagan was openly just an actor, literally.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Reagan, if you look at Biden and Reagan, you'd say they were very similar from a...
They're used for a reason, you know.
Yeah.
That you're actually, people are looking at them as if to say they're running the show. Really? I mean, you can't even begin to understand why anyone would believe that shit show.
No.
Even going back to Reagan, well, even going to Johnson now, and then Richie Sunak now. I mean, can you really think that they're...
Someone does, don't they? I mean, there's a certain section of people that actually think that politics are going to save them.
Yeah.
And that's why they have to keep inventing these characters. But they don't do a really good job if you look at them, because they bring Boris Johnson, who's Fun Boy 3, if you like. He comes in as a laugh. You've got Rishi Sunak, who's more... meant to be, by the way, I'm not saying they are, meant to be more financially bright. You had David Cameron, who that steady Eddie type guy. You had Mr. Accountant Gordon Brown.
They brought in at a certain
then you had
point,
Tony Blair, who were a film star, rock star, supposedly.
Well, they needed a film star, rock star to take us into a war that no one wanted.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
You needed someone with some so-called charisma, some level of plastic charisma.
I mean, when you think about it, you go back to Ted Heath, and you look at him and how...
The satanic paedophile?
No, he wasn't Christian. He just made him out.
Oh, no, sorry, I read it in the Times. He was a paedophile, but he wasn't a satanic paedophile. So
that's all right.
Yeah.
But you look at Ted Heath, and you can imagine the amount of pressure and the hold they had on him to do stuff. And who came in after? I think it was James Callaghan for Labour, and then it was Margaret Thatcher. And all these people were turned into barons or sirs or whatever, baronesses, Baroness Thatcher.
They never leave disgrace, do they? Ever?
No.
They have some fake disgrace. I think Maggie Thatcher had some fake whatever, but by the time she croaked, you know.
Yeah, but then look at Barack Obama. Look at that guy giving evidence, stood on a podium, swearing on a Bible, giving an affidavit that he were in a limo with him, give him a BJ, and he smoked crack, and nobody's interested in it, and he's president.
Yeah,
and nobody denounces it. They just ignore it and hope it goes away.
I mean, to be fair, Obama's probably the only one who seemed like he had any wits about him. Wouldn't you say?
But do you think that now?
No, but he did actually have some charisma, didn't he? He's probably the only one that I've ever seen.
Yeah, but that was because he was black, and he wouldn't be first black president.
No, not just because he was black. Just the way he talked, he was more articulate than any of the others.
But he was just better trained, wasn't he?
Better trained, yeah. I think
under more pressure, so they didn't release the truth.
No, I think they primed him and used him for what he was useful for, which was actually, apparently, he was more... he was a drone president, wasn't he? He was more violent than bloody Bush, but Bush was sold as the war president.
Ironically, like all these other characters that we've been showing, Obama, or Barack Obama, also follows lineage from King Edward III. He's also a Plantagenet. Just like Orwell, Huxley's, Charles Darwin, and some of the other characters that you'll see, I'm putting up there, if you're watching this on a video, with an image and their descendancy from some royal line or another. And some of them have dual lines as well, as you'll be seeing, or their wives are matched up with a royal member. And it's ironic, isn't it, that all these leaders, and there are a lot more, at some point I'm going to do a full show on presidents and prime ministers linked back to royal bloodlines. But I mean, in fairness, these people, they don't know what the plan is, do they? They're told part of the plan.
Who knows?
They're just going to go. I'd say out of all the presidents that I can think and prime ministers, I'd say George Bush Sr. was probably more in the in crowd than any of them.
Yeah, I would as well.
He knew what was going on. But that's just my opinion.
No,
Not that he was any
I would
good for
agree.
anybody.
He was the one that was coming out with the whole plan at the beginning.
Yeah.
And did he throw his own son under the bus?
Well, do they care?
Yeah.
I think it is like Game of Thrones, isn't it? That's what we're looking at.
But no matter what happens with any president, we notice in America and in England, they give it a few years and they wheel him out as some kind of veteran,
Yeah.
Even with Clinton and stuff. I mean, they wheel them out like they've got all this history behind them. It's the same they do with pop stars, isn't it? No matter how shy the Spice Girls were 20 years ago, they wheel them out now. Like
Everyone's forgotten about it now.
Yeah, like there's some, unadulterated talent.
Yeah. And again, that's what we're talking about here, aren't we? Yeah. Sources of information. As always, the information is taken from mainstream sources. And it's when you see it all together that the picture of truth materialises. My sources are mainstream. Genetics websites like Gene, which is an American commercial genealogy and social networking website founded in 2006, now owned since 2012 by MyHeritage, which is a private Israeli company. As of 2021, MyHeritage has kept its genealogical website separate from Genie's website. Of course it has. Though the Smart Matches feature enables matching of Genie profiles to trees on MyHeritage, I thought it was separate, and to other family tree sites and digitised records. And although we know that these companies are using this information against us, they also have to put this information out there into the mainstream as part of their karmic revelation of the method. So that means we can use their own tools to piece together some of the evidence. I view this, most of the pharma or big agri companies own not only the food or the drugs, but they also own all the vitamins and minerals. So if I went to buy a load of vitamin C, for argument's sake, direct, I'd be buying it from one of the big chemical or pharmaceutical companies. Does that make it bad? No, because what we're going to understand is this is the maze, this is the trick. Ooh, how many people really take high doses of vitamin C? Probably the elites. They've probably got IV sticking in their arm constantly of vitamin C. That's why they want to own it. This is the trick, innit? This is the trick. And same with these heritage sites. Is all the do I trust every piece of the information? No. So you go to several and you try and cross-reference it. You utilise people's work who are professors in this area. They're not doing it for the reason we're doing it. They're doing it purely for an academic reason. They only see that one person in isolation. They don't look at all these other people and think, how are all these people linked? Genie was founded by 3 people. I found this interesting, actually, so I thought I'd leave this in. This just shows how these companies are founded. David O. Sachs, Alan Braverman, and Amos Elliston. They're surrounded by interesting characters that really sum up how this system works in the modern digital era. David O. Sachs is an entrepreneur, author, and investor in internet tech firms. He's a general partner of Craft Ventures, a VC or venture capital firm he founded in 2017. Previously, Sachs was the founding COO, which is the Chief Operating Officer and product leader of PayPal. His angel investments include Facebook, Uber, SpaceX, Palantir Technologies, and Airbnb, to name a few. So these people are investing in all these massive tech companies. They're all linked. He earned his BA in economics from Stanford University, who we've mentioned before is a CIA hotspot. In 1999, Sachs left his job as a management consultant for McKinsey & Company, massive corporation, corporate members of the Atlantic Council, Business Roundtable, Council on Foreign Relations, and they're also strategic partners of the World Economic Forum. Sachs left to join e-commerce service PayPal. So these guys leave these massive corporations and then set these massive digital corporations up at the start of the digital boom. Sachs, as I said, left to join e-commerce company PayPal, which he had co-founded the year before with Max Levchin and Peter Thiel. This was pre-Musk. It was set up before Musk. Sachs is a member of the so-called PayPal Mafia, who we've mentioned quite a few times. It's a group of former PayPal employees and founders who have since gone on to found or develop additional tech companies such as Tesla, LinkedIn, Palantir, SpaceX, Affirm, Slide, Kiva, YouTube, Yelp, and Yammer. Most of the members attended Stanford University. Peter Thiel is known as the Don of the PayPal Mafia, which includes Musk, Chad Hurley, co-founder of YouTube, a young global leader in 2009, Jawed Karim, co-founder of YouTube, Max Levchin, co-founder and CTO of PayPal, who was a young global leader in 2011. Peter Thiel, a billionaire, has attended many meetings and he's also a member of the Bilderberg Steering Committee since 2007 up to today, 2023. He's a young global leader of 2007 and he has business links to British intelligence services at GCHQ and the CIA. These are the people setting these companies up. Incidentally, I don't know if you read this, Chris, Thiel apparently has links to a company called Ambrosia, which has been selling young blood transfusions for $8,000 since 2016 under the guise of running a clinical trial to see if such transfusions lead to changes in the blood of recipients.
Modern day vampirism, basically.
Yeah. What does ambrosia mean in the Bible? It means giving immortality, which goes to what you just said. Food of the gods. Interesting, all this stuff in it. I find it interesting.
Well, you think of the mythology of a vampire. He drinks virgin's blood. So pure, uncontaminated blood.
Yeah.
And that's what you'd get from a young person, I suppose. You're getting a virgin's blood, aren't
you? Yeah. Young blood transfusion refers to transfusing blood specifically from a young person into an older one with the intention of creating a health benefit. Experiments began in the 1950s at Cornell University in the lab of Clive McKay on pairs of old and young rodents placed into parabiosis, which I've mentioned again before, provided some evidence, although limited and largely anecdotal, that the circulation of blood from young to old mice increased both longevity and tissue function. After decades in which relatively little work on parabiosis in aging was done, I just can't believe that little work has been done, the work was revived by researchers at Stanford and the University of California at Berkeley. These universities have a track record in black operations run by the US intelligence agencies under the cover of research, funded via large corporations or NGOs. Thiel, who went to Stanford, also has links to the intelligence communities via Palantir Technologies, which among the list of past and current clients include the NSA, CIA, Department of Homeland Security and Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. The company awarded various contracts as a result of 91 DIVC and has accessed health data from the UK and US. Palantir was providing 91 DIVC tracking software to the CDC and NHS by April 2020 from nowhere and was pitching to the European health agencies as well. Thiel was quoted as saying, "I'm looking into parabiosis stuff, where they injected the young blood into older mice and they found that they had massive rejuvenating effects. I think there are a lot of these things that have been strangely underexplored." Anyway, that's where it takes you. It could take you down 2 million rabbit holes if you're not careful. My initial Orwell genealogy came from several professional genealogists using family tree sites, Professor Mark Humphreys, Ed Mann, Leo van der Paar, and George Larson, to name a few. What makes these usable is the fact that they are not looking at the lineages from our point of view, but come from an academic background. I then, as you will see, back this up by using Genie and other genealogy sites. I used a few books in this research, to name a couple: George Orwell by Gordon Bowker and Bernard Crick's book about George Orwell. Lorraine and Sam also helped me, and Chris, with some of the research and some read-throughs and additional information about the Limousine family. Lorraine did loads of work on that, although we weren't able to use it all, otherwise we'd have gone on for hours. The research in this episode alone took me several months to prepare and put together. There is a lot of detail, so you may have to stick with it and come back again for it to sink in. Ironically, I could have used more detail about the individuals and families, but that'll save. I want to address a question I've been asked many times, and it's taken me around in a total different journey around in circles, actually. Is Tony Blair related to Eric Blair? The simple answer would be no, but as a researcher, you have to look, and here's what I found. In this research, I managed to find links to Julian Aldous, Huxley's, and Orwell, and Tony Blair, so he's possibly distantly related to all three via the Plantagenet bloodline. So Tony Blair has a royal lineage through his maternal grandma, the travelling stage performer, Celia Ridgway, that's where it's similar to Nancy Reagan.
Mm.
Yeah. B. Lyer was the second son of Leo and Hazel Blair, whose maiden name was Corskadden, and a very interesting maiden name coming from the ancient Scottish-Irish Corskadden clan. The Irish Corskadden clan own most of the castles in Ireland today, still today. B. Lyer's father, Leo Blair, was adopted. Leo was born the son of travelling entertainers Celia Ridgway and Charles Linton Parsons. These are Tony Blair's biological grandparents. The Ridgway family were prominent wealthy cotton mill owners. Celia Ridgway and Charles Linton Parsons were not married when Leo Blair was born in 1923. Apparently, social stigma combined with the family's lifestyle prompted his parents to give up baby Leo to James Blair and his wife Mary Blair because they couldn't have children. Celia Ridgway and Charles Linton Parsons met the Blairs while on tour in Glasgow. Does this sound odd?
Well,
it sounded odd to me.
And also, travelling entertainers, they're often used as they're often spies, aren't they?
Mm.
Or Secret Service.
Yeah.
Going right back to Houdini.
Yeah.
Because they move around, they can transfer messages, especially in them days when there wasn't as much communication. But you imagine if you're an entertainer who can go abroad, you can travel messages between countries even.
Yeah, and also the whole idea of being a secret agent is you would never know that they're a secret agent.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, there's that. I think we mentioned before that film that George Clooney made about that American presenter who claimed he worked for CIA, who was an assassin.
Mm.
And then you've got the story that Mark talked about with who is it? The Hallelujah guy's wife. That he was a secret agent.
Yeah.
He's for a reason because it's the least person you'd expect to be that person.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah, you wouldn't expect a famous singer to be an intelligence operative, or even a hitman, would you?
Exactly. We're laughing instantly by just thinking about it because
Yeah. Yeah, it can be quite comical. It's through the Blair's maternal grandma, the travelling stage performer, Celia Ridgway, that gives Blair his royal genealogy. Celia was a stage name. Her real name was Mary Augusta Ridgway Parsons Brideson. Through direct lineage from his biological maternal grandma, Blair is a direct descendant of King James V of Scotland. Blair is also a descendant of Charlemagne. I'm probably destroying all these names, by the way, so don't pick on me. I'm just an uneducated Yorkshireman. As my mate Sam said, that direct line to Charlemagne seems to be important for the Blue Bloods. They like to trace their ancestry through Charlemagne back to the ruling aristocratic dynasty of Rome, Claudia, the Claudius Caesar line. Because history tells us that Rome was founded by Aeneas, a noble who fled the sack of Troy. He was the great-grandson of the founder of Troy, Ilus, which makes Rome ruling bloodlines Trojan. Troy was founded by the Phoenicians. Ilus descended from Dardanus, a son of Zeus. That's where, again, history becomes mythology.
Mm.
At the beginning of this presentation, in the part where I was talking about Woodstock, I mentioned Robert Stewart. Blair is a direct descendant of Robert Stewart, who was the first Earl of Orkney and Lord of Zetland. Robert Stewart was the illegitimate son of James V, King of Scotland, and his mistress, Euphemie Elphinstone. Robert Stewart was the half-brother of Mary Queen of Scots and uncle to James VI, and was also James I of Scotland and England. Euphemie Elphinstone was the mistress of James V of Scotland, and while she was married into the Bruce family. The Huxley family are also married into the Bruce family. Her children and descendants were significant in the history of the Shetland Islands and Orkney Islands. In December 1561, Robert Stewart married Lady Jean Kennedy, daughter of Gilbert Kennedy, 3rd Earl of Cassilis, and his wife, Margaret Kennedy. Robert Kennedy, the 1st Earl of Orkney, daughter, Jean Stewart, married Patrick Leslie, 1st Lord of Lindores, who was a member of the Scottish nobility. Patrick Leslie was a second son of Andrew Leslie, the 5th Earl of Rothes. The current heir of the Earl of Rothes is James Malcolm David Leslie, 22nd Earl of Rothes, born 1958, on the 4th of June 1958. Blair would be a distant relation of his. Blair. As I said a minute ago, Robert Stewart, 1st Earl of Orkney and Lord of Zetland, was half-uncle to James Charles Stewart, who was the King of Scotland, or as James VI. James VI was a son of Mary Queen of Scots and great-grandson of Henry VII. All of these people, families, are descendants of Blair's via his biological grandmother, Celia Ridgway, a.k.a. Mary Augusta Ridgway Parsons Brideson. Mary Queen of Scots, known as Mary Stuart or Mary I of Scotland, was Queen of Scotland, a legitimate child of James V. Interestingly, Blair's royal ancestors don't just stop at James V, King of Scotland. James V was a knight of the Habsburg Order of the Golden Fleece, a knight of the Garter, as Blair and other. Blair's also a knight of the Garter. Another coincidence, no doubt. James V was the son of Margaret Tudor, Princess of England, who was the daughter of King Henry VII of England. James's grandfather, that was. King Henry was also a knight of the Habsburg Order of the Golden Fleece. What does all this mean, Chris?
Well, I was just thinking that Golden Fleece, that's from the Jason and the Argonauts. So you're tying it back into mythology again, aren't you?
Greek mythology again.
Yeah. How interesting. Like Sam said, I think these bloodlines all go back to that ancient time. I think we've talked about that before.
Yeah.
And like, just why include the Golden Fleece in there?
Yeah. And there'd be a big group of them. It reminds me, I don't know if you remember that Transformers film with Anthony Hopkins in it.
Right. Yeah, I've watched them, but they all merge into one, don't they?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, I've watched them because humans watch them. But there was one where he was an old, either baron or earl or something like that, lived in a big stately home.
Mm.
And when the Transformers came out, he was like a knight, meant to be like a supposed Knights Templar type character, even though he was like an old guy, you know. And it were all hidden. It were not to do with Queen and country. It was that's what this reminds me like. There's a seam running through that's got nothing to do with what we think it has.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in Transformers films, to be fair.
Yeah. Henry VII's wife, Princess of England's father, was King Edward IV, whose father was also from the Plantagenet bloodline. He was Richard of York, 3rd Duke of York, a.k.a. Richard Plantagenet, mentioned earlier. Richard was a member of the ruling house of Plantagenet by virtue of being a direct male line descendant of Edmund of Langley, King Edward III's 4th surviving son. Again, Edward III is an ancestor of Charles Darwin, Julius Aldous Huxley, and George Orwell. Blair is via that lineage related to Charles VI, the Mad King of France, 1380 to 1422, via Catherine de Valois, Princess of France. Valois, Catherine de Valois. Some of Blair's ancestors were Austrian and German. They were the Dukes of Bavaria, and one of them was German Ludwig IV, a.k.a. Ludwig de Bayer, Duke of Bavaria, also Louis IV, known as Louis IV, or simply known as the Bavarian.
Dramatic.
Yeah. So Blair's got somebody in his background known as the Bavarian. Ludwig was elected King of Germany 1314. He was King of the Romans from 1314 as well, King of Italy from 1327, and the Holy Roman Emperor from 1328 until his death in 1347. Blair is also related to Matilde von Habsburg, daughter of Rudolf I, who was also Roman Emperor elected in 1273 to 1291, known as the Graf von Habsburg, aka Rudolf I of Germany, the first king of Germany from the House of Habsburg. The first of the Count Kings of Germany, he reigned from 1273 until his death. Originally, Rudolf I was a Swabian count. I ain't making this stuff up. I'll say it again. Rudolf I was a Swabian count. Remember, in 1971, Otto von Habsburg delivered the inaugural speech to launch the World Economic Forum in Davos. Did Otto know that Rudolf I was a Swabian count? When Blair is in Davos, does he know that his ancestors were members of the House of Habsburg, Dukes of Bavaria, Swabian counts, kings of Germany, Italy, Scotland, England, and the Holy Roman Emperors? The Dukes of Swabia were rulers of the Duchy of Swabia during the Middle Ages. So now we know why Blair is where he is and why Schwab is where he is. Has Blair got the Habsburg chin? I say as a bit.
Yeah.
So in summary, Tony B. Lyer, who now has the knighthood, and now has a knighthood of his own, he holds the most noble order of the Garter, as did his ancestor, King James V, King of Scotland, who was also a knight of the Garter, just like Blair is. From James V, Blair is related to Henry VII via James V's mother, Margaret Tudor, and she's the daughter of Henry VII. The Order of the Garter was founded by Edward III of England. Henry VII is a descendant of Edward III. So this means B. Lyer is a descendant of Edward III, just like Sir Julian and Aldous Huxley and George Orwell. Edward III and Henry VII are descendants of Brian Boru, High King of Ireland, which means B. Lyer probably is too. And come to that, as do all Henry III and Henry VII descendants, which include Julian, Aldous and Orwell, and all the other people that we've mentioned. Oh, and just to add another part to this, Blair is a 12th cousin once removed of King Charles.
Might as well
So
be.
to wrap the B. Lyer section up, the question at the start was, is Blair connected via the Blair name to Eric Blair? I'd say in that sense the answer is no. However, he is connected via the Celia Ridgway lineage, so the answer is yes. There is a caveat, being that the adopted Blair name Tony was given couldn't possibly be related to Eric Blair's, because he wasn't a Blair, but the Blair name could be because they came from Scotland too, as did Eric Blair, and as did the descendants of Eric Blair. So there could be a link, but I don't know.
There could be a link, and the name could be almost a coincidence.
Yes.
An actual coincidence.
Yeah, an actual coincidence. Yep. I'd like to hope it is. I'd like to hope it is a coincidence. We're still about under a third of the way through, though. It's going a bit smoother than I thought.
Yeah, I think it's because genealogy stuff, you kind of whip through it a bit, don't you?
Yeah, you do.
Because interference from me.
Yeah, well, there's not a lot to sort of talk around it, is there? Unless you find an interesting point, which we found enough in the first hour. And what I said at the beginning, what I wanted to get out of that first hour was that these lines go back to a lot of different people, but they're all these people in history. Tony Blair, presidents. We all knew about the presidents. But we didn't know about the sort of academics as well. So it's not just about the people that are pretending to run the pantomime. It's the people who are teaching other people, or books we're reading, or what have you, that are also of this bloodline. The odd thing is,
I would guess it goes into business and all sorts.
100%. But the strange thing is when you see these professional genealogists, one of them says, "Yeah, if we wanted, we could. If we had the information, we could. Everybody would be related." And I'm thinking, well, no, that's if you believe that there were only Adam and Eve on Earth at one point. You know, if you go to the belief structure that there was just Adam and Eve, and they ate an apple, poisoned themselves, and that's where everybody came from, then we came from a fish coming out of some primordial mud. Then yeah, that's probably true, but nobody's proved that.
No, there's no proof of anything. And you've got to at least believe that we're different, kind of half different species.
Well, I think the proof's in the pudding.
Without being funny, no one can explain to me, right? I'm sure Brian Cox could, but why there's black people, why there's Oriental people, why there's all these different
Asian
races.
people.
Yeah, there must be a reason, and it's not the one we've been told.
But even if you go back to the deeper stuff, like Aborigines, native Indians in America, South American Incas type tribes, Easter Island, go to the Maoris in New Zealand, the Fijians, all these indigenous people that look nothing like Europeans or even Africans.
I know. It doesn't balance out at all.
No, it don't balance out at all. And so we've got to accept that. Well, I accept it. It's not even a belief that these people are different. They're either Mark 1 escort, a Mark 2 escort, a Mark 3 escort type of thing, and they've moved it on. And now we've got the evil Mark 10 escort, which is the white European type of thing that's just basically a murdering monster.
I do like the what's his name's version of events. What's his name, Dom? The guy who died, who was looking at that alien, the Bigfoot. He did the Bigfoot thing. Everything you know is a lie.
Yeah, I know what you mean. The Star Child guy.
Yeah, and he did that whole thing about these Caucasians or gods or angels were mating with Bigfoot. I thought that was an interesting take on it.
Yeah.
He puts it together better than me.
But I liked him as well, and I liked his work. I've forgotten his name now, but anyway, you've thrown me there.
Thrown me as well. I can't believe it.
Yeah. So in the last 1 to 2 hours, we're going to discuss the genealogy research I've done on George Orwell, and also we're going to talk a little bit about the George Orwell Society, and it goes pretty deep, and it's heavy going with a lot of information. But what you'll see, if you haven't already worked it out from the previous 2 episodes, is that Orwell, and this is the finding that we're getting, and when you look at other people's work like Dave McGowan or Mark Devlin's and other people, Fritz Springmeier, people like that, you realise that this isn't organic. Orwell's not an organic genius, in my opinion, if he existed. Because the question's got to be out there if he was just a character.
Well,
it was played by multiple people.
There's very minimal photographs of him and literally no video, no footage.
Yeah, overall, what I think this type of research shows or proves is that there's some kind of ultimate Prometheus order bloodline that supersedes all humans. I like that word when I thought of it, supersede, and supersedes as in SEEDS. Supersedes. All right, let's get on with it. I was doing some rudimentary genealogy research. As I said, this Orwell part, we're going to be about 30 minutes within one of the Huxley presentations. And it was on Orwell's ancestors a few months ago. Not really expecting to find a great deal because I thought it'd have all been written about, being honest. Or find anything that was important, as I thought it would have been done by serious professional autobiographers, genealogists, etc., etc., etc. And then, boom, I was at home in Halifax. It was one Sunday night on the 16th of April, 2023 to be exact. And I stumbled across a treasure trove of ancestorial history on Orwell that I just wasn't expecting. This is how I get my eyes now, Chris. Pretty sad. That night I didn't sleep too well because I wanted to carry on researching, but I knew I had to get up to drop young off at school. But anyway, there you go. The question I always ask myself is this information real, or is it part of the fairy tale of the Orwell operation? I always have to keep that in back of my mind. But real or not, it's the Scooby-Doo trail that the controllers want us to follow and believe. So it carries credence of some sort because that's the direction they're wanting us to go in. Now, it could be a blind alley as well, but why would this be a blind alley when it leads to so many important figures?
Well, we say that a lot, don't we? Whether it's true or not sometimes makes no difference because somebody wants you to believe this stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't really matter, does it?
If anything, you've witnessed, even let's just say it's not true, right? But what you've witnessed is somebody rewriting history.
Yeah.
So then you question the whole Orwell thing again, don't you? Because if they're willing to rewrite the history of a supposed character, then Orwell can't be real. Or they're covering something up that they don't want you to see. In my opinion, this would have been the best Orwell novel or biography ever. I never found any of this stuff written anywhere in any of the biographies that I looked at. And they're quite mainstream ones. I mentioned them earlier. When I'm done, you'll see what got me so excited. So let's recap at the beginning. Eric Arthur Blair, born 25th of June 1903. That's around the summer solstice, is it, that, Chris?
I don't know. It's fair. I'm not very good on the solstices.
Died at 21st of January 1950. Better known by his pen name, or lifetime actor's name, or undercover intelligence name, George Orwell. He was an English novelist, essayist, journalist, critic, and spy. An amateur watercolourist.
Oh,
He didn't mention that, though, in that I've had the spy and watercolourist in.
Oh,
yeah.
right.
Can you remember we talked about him being a watercolourist, meeting that woman in one of the episodes?
Yeah.
Orwell was born in Motihari in British India into what he described as a lower upper middle class family. He was the son of Richard Walmsley Blair and Ida Mabel Blair. We'll come to Ida's family later. Richard Walmsley Blair was the son of Thomas Arthur Richard Blair and Frances Catherine Hare. Blair and Hare. The Hare family are another family we'll come to later. Thomas Arthur Richard Blair was the son of Orwell's paternal grandfather or great-grandfather, Charles Blair, born circa 1763 in Dorset, in England. He was the son of Orwell's paternal great-great-grandfather, Charles Blair Sr. Charles Sr. was a wealthy country gentleman from Dorset and an absentee owner of Jamaican plantations, not plantation, plantations, in the mid to late 1700s and to early 1800s. So his father, Richard Walmsley Blair, who sold opium in India, worked for the opium department of the British government and sold it to China. And his great-great-grandfather was Charles Blair, who owned slave plantations.
Right.
These are the first indications that something's probably not, probably amiss.
Lower upper middle classes, you say?
Yeah. I mean, maybe it were prevalent then that you had to identify yourself in a class of some nature. I've never been big on classes, have you?
No, but it used to be. But to claim that you're a lower upper class and you've got slave plantations and you're probably working for East India Company.
Yeah, well, some of his family are. There's no doubt about it.
Well, why else would he be born in India?
Well, again, where's Rishi Sunak from? He's from India. You know, there is a big connection to India, and a lot of the royal families went to India. I think Mountbatten were in India. I think a lot of these royals in the probably 18th century, 19th century,
well, early
20th century were all based in India or went to India. A lot of them did. I'm not saying all of them.
And then we pretended to leave.
Yeah, and then we pretended to leave. And now they're flying rockets to space that look like Thunderbird 2.
No, that's an insult to Jerry Anderson, that is. His Thunderbirds were far superior to that monstrosity we saw landing on the moon.
Even NASA make it look more realistic than Bollywood.
Well, they just don't show it landed anymore, do they?
No. So that was a brief overview, just to get us minds ticking back into who Orwell was. So let's get straight into Orwell's ancestors and family. If you're watching this on a YouTube presentation, I'll be playing images of the genealogy lines as I talk through them or about them, and other images, like I was doing in the first hour, that connects Orwell to other influential blood relations. what I would say is I'd watch the YouTube video first before listening to it on a podcast, because you get a grip of what we're actually talking about as we're going through it. So we're going to talk about the Limousine family, which was Orwell's mother's side of the family. Info about the Limousine family comes from my own research, genealogy websites, and George Bowker, these are authors, and Bernard Crick books, and Lorraine as well. Lorraine sent me a load of information. Some of it I'm not going to use in here, not because it wasn't good information. It's just, I think I've narrowed it down to prove the point. Otherwise, this would have gone on for hours. I think if you were going to write a book, you'd include it all in a book, kind of, because you'd need that information to. You could use it as a visual. Limousine was a name applied to natives of the ancient French province of Limoges, which is located in west central France. Orwell's mother was Ida Mabel Blair, whose maiden name was Limousine. She was the daughter of Francis Matthew Limousine, aka Frank, and Teresa Limousine. She had 6 sisters and 3 brothers. There isn't much in the way of solid information, but they were an aristocratic Limousinian family. And the information, or the limited information, other than that they were originally from minor aristocratic French backgrounds. And the limited information I found said they become wealthy, a wealthy aristocratic family in Burma via boat building and teak timber businesses. Trading in teak was their main occupation. The Limousine family from Limoges in France. Limousine was the name, as I said, applied to natives of the ancient French province. Jean-Eugène Limousine, born around 1800 in France, died in 1860 at the age of 60, and presuming in Burma. John was the father of Francis, who I said was known as Frank, William, and Joseph Limousine. Frank, born in 1835 in Bordeaux, and died in 1915, aged 80, in Rangoon, Burma, emigrated to Burma with his wife, Eliza Fallon. Documents describe her as a white American. And his brothers, William and Joseph, sometime in the late 1850s. Joseph also brought his wife, Mary, with him, and William was single. The brothers settled in Mormelin, in Burma, one of the most picturesque ports in the east, situated on the mouth of the Salween River. As well as a busy trading centre, it was a centre for shipbuilding. William found work as a shipwright and Joseph as a general merchant, while Frank was employed in the offices of a large shipping company. Shortly after arriving in Burma, William produced a child with an Indian woman called Sooma, S-O-O-M-A. Not Soma. By 1864, Frank, aged 29, and Eliza, 23, had 2 young children. 2-year-old Arthur and Emily, aged 1. Then quite suddenly, Frank found himself a widower and childless, so all his family had died. In 1865, Frank married 22-year-old Englishwoman Therese Catherine Haley. Within 3 years, he had set up a timber merchant, was settled in a large house proudly known as Franconia in the fashionable riverside district of Salween Park, and was busy creating a second family. They ended up having 8 children. By the end of the century, Frank was head of his own company, Limousine & Co., as a teak merchant and boat builder. You can imagine at that time that was quite a big business to be in, boat building. But later lost much of his money speculating on rice. Frank was the local consular agent for Italy, a country with which he did a great deal of business. A consul is an official representative of a government who resides in a foreign country to assist and protect citizens of the consul's country, and to promote and facilitate commercial and diplomatic relations between the two countries. So he's sort of like a middleman between his country, which was supposed to be Burma, or the East India Company, and Italy. In 1886, at the age of 31, Frank was considered to be one of the 2 wealthiest timber merchants in all of Burma. Lower middle class, upper middle class. Yeah. In a French journal of 1886, the journal de Voyages des Adventures. Do you like my French there, Chris? Yeah. Anyway, the richest timber merchants in all of Burma are two inhabitants of Mourmelin. Mr. Davoud, who made his fortune in less than 20 years, and Mr. Limousine, who was born in Bordeaux, came to the country at the age of 10, and near whom all Frenchmen are assured of finding the most cordial welcome. One of Frank's 8 children was Orwell's mother, Ida. In an article I read on darcymoore.net, said that Frank Limousine, Orwell's grandfather, was a Freemason. Their business was in Burma, where coincidence would have it that Orwell went back to join the Indian Imperial Police. Mourmelin was a setting of George Orwell's famous 1936 memoir, Shooting an Elephant. You've mentioned this before, haven't you?
Do you know, I remember getting read that at school,
Right.
like junior school.
Okay.
I didn't know it was George Orwell at the time, obviously.
Yeah.
But it always stuck with me because it's quite an interesting story, isn't it?
Right.
Did you know that story?
No, I don't know the story.
So I think is it based on him? And basically, I might get this wrong, but they're in India, and I remember a teacher telling him it because it kind of haunted me. And this elephant's running wild. I think I'm getting this right. It's running wild, and it's a danger. So the British officers are asked to shoot it.
Right.
But then, by the time they get to it, it's calmed down and it's all kind of peaceful. But through peer pressure, he's forced to shoot it. I think that's basically the story. But obviously written very well by him. But I remember it stuck with me for years. That did really one of those stories that really bothered me.
It's an odd story to read at school, though, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I've never read it since. I've never reread it since.
Thinking about all these things, like with Twilight language and all this other stuff, it does make you wonder what all these words actually are. That an innocent teacher's reading a 14-year-old or whatever in school about that were written in 1936.
Yeah, why? And
it's just carry any.
It's a story about peer pressure as well, being forced to do something that you don't really morally think is the right thing to do.
I suppose that elephant.
I think he kills it. I'm pretty sure he shoots it.
Right. It could be like a firing squad in World War One. That's a similar sort of thing, isn't it? Where you're shooting your own men.
Well, you could drag them connotations up to what's just happened in the last 3 years: peer pressure
doctors,
and being forced into doing something you don't really want to do.
Yeah. Maybe that's the psychological twist on this, that they're telling you you've got to do stuff you don't want to do. I mean, that is force-fed down you. If you think about most going to school, I know we're talking about something different, but most of the lessons, like we were talking about this yesterday, that you don't actually want to do them and they're a total waste of time. But yet they still force you to do the lessons, even if you're no good at them or you don't want to do them. It doesn't make sense, does it? Why not pick out what you're really good at and work on that? But they don't. Which tells you that they don't want you to do what you're good at because they don't want anybody to excel, do they?
No.
They want a cookie cutter that everybody fits into.
You don't want you to be an academic, which means you're indoctrinated into their way of thinking.
Yeah. Which again cancels out George Orwell being this organic, free-thinking free spirit, when in reality, not in the system, nothing works like that, does it?
No.
It did actually say, the essay opens with these striking sentence. In Moulmein in Lower Burma, I was hated by large numbers of people. This is George Orwell writing this. The only time in my life that I have been important enough for this to happen to me, because his family was so well known.
Right. You can't imagine what they must have done.
To be hated so much. And you're talking, I mean, when did his granddad died in 1915, right? He was born, I think, 1907, did I say? Anyway, around that mark. So you're talking, like, I don't know, he was through the mid-1800s to then, so roughly about just over 100 years, under 100 years. And so they're hated by the Burmese population there. But why did he go back? There's no mention that in any of the things that I read, and there might be, because I'm not a well-read person on Orwell, but none of them said George Orwell went back to India to discover his roots of his family that was there. Because if you're going back to exactly the same place, which he has done, why wouldn't you even mention that? Why is there no mention of that? Again, what's missing sometimes is the clue to what they're trying to cover up. There are also stories, and I'm not saying this is true, that they were running Burma Oil, which was a petroleum company, that was alleged to be owned by the Rothschild family, or part owned by the Rothschild family, funded by the Rothschild family. And the Burma Oil Company was a leading British oil company at the time, which was once on the FTSE 100. In 1966, Castrol was bought by Burma, which was renamed Burma Castrol. And now it's called, then it was renamed BP Amoco, and now it's BP. So this company, were these people involved in all this stuff? So it ain't just timber we're talking about. We're talking about Burma oil, as in Burmese. They were in Burma, so they were using shipping. How did they get the oil from there to here? Via ships. So they were all part of all this makeup of exporting materials from someone else's country, basically, robbing it blind. One other interesting character in Orwell's life was Elaine, or Ellen. A lot of these people have several names, which also you don't come across in normal people.
No.
They have several names that trip back. So this
someone might have a nickname, but then that's it.
Yeah, a nickname's one thing.
Changes the name.
A lot of these people go by different names. Elaine Ellen Kate Limousin, born 1870, died 1950, a few months before, I think it was before Orwell died. I think it was about 5 months. I mentioned that in one of the other episodes. She was born in Moulmein in Burma as well, the third daughter of Frank. So she's Ida's sister, George Orwell's mother. Elaine was Orwell's aunt, known to him as Aunt Nellie. So she's called, what was she called? Elaine, Ellen, Kate, and Aunt Nellie. Orwell's mother, Ida Limousin, was the younger sister of Aunt Nellie. She seems to have been very influential in his life. Aunt Nellie Limousin was a feminist, a suffragette, and there's a photograph of her with the Pankhurst sisters. You've got to be pretty influential. They wouldn't invite you into their clique to have, anyway. And
you would hazard a guess that the whole suffragette thing was a very early psyop.
Yeah, it's still continuing today. Elaine Limousin was born into this is what it says. Elaine Limousin was born into the aristocratic family of Frank and Teresa Limousin, and later moved to London. This French translation is the only one that I found that described the Limousins as aristocratic. The contrast seen in both parts of the world, India, Europe, Burma, in the relations between classes, castes and sexes, radicalised her. This is what it says. And she became a feminist and also a communist. So there's a lot of things here. She's a feminist, a suffragette, a communist. And this was after the Russian Revolution in 1917. So this is his auntie, right? I'm already thinking that there's something not quite right here. Bear in mind, her dad works for Italian consul, that works for government in... well, it wouldn't be Burma, it'd be British Burma. Aunt Nellie was often called during his stay in Paris, and he stayed with her and her husband, Eugene Lante. Eugene Lante was another pseudonym. He was actually called Eugene Adam. So he's staying with people who've got several names, which always relates to me that who would have several names? Yeah.
And well, even the fact they were clearly aristocratic, they weren't any middle class of anything, and it seems like they were working probably with our father government. What do you say?
Well, I would say that
100%.
If someone's a communist at that time, around the Russian Revolution, they're at least getting looked at by whatever secret services country they're in, or other secret. If they're living in France and they're travelling to London and they're communists, they're going to be getting looked at by French and British intelligence, aren't they? I would say so, especially during the war. During that time, Limousin and Lante greatly influenced the then young Orwell politically. According to author Bernard Crick, Nellie Limousin was an intellectual and bohemian in lifestyle. Family-wise, she was Orwell's favourite family member. At the end of 1921, Aunt Nellie joined the newly born stateless Association Global, known as SAT, which sounds very much like New World Order. I mean, you talk about it, there are no countries. I mean, that just says it there in the title here, right? This is after World War I, obviously. She met Eugene Lante in 1923 at the Third SAT Congress in Kassel, Germany, or Kassel, Germany. There they became friends in meetings of the communist faction of SAT, where Lante and Limousin were both less faithful to the Moscow trend of communism than any other fellow faction members. So, to me, that looks like they've been inserted into this to upset the flow of... So they're telling everybody the communists, which is what Orwell went and said he was, and yet he worked for the British government.
It's only words out your mouth, and it means nothing.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
It does, no, it does. It does. Aunt Nellie and Limousin and Lante married in Paris. They had an open marriage. You're talking at mid-1920s here, and they're saying they had an open marriage, right? Yeah. And it seemed that Orwell had that... Pardon?
Yeah, we've heard that a lot, actually.
Yeah.
And the version of the 1920s we get, you wouldn't think that was a thing, would you? I mean, there is that party time, I suppose, the 1920s happened, didn't it? I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose. After the war and everyone, yeah. Now listen to this bit, Chris. She funded Orwell during his stay in Paris while working in kitchens and acting as a down and out for his first book.
Acting as a down and out?
That's what it says.
I'm pretty sure in that book he makes out he is down and out. I always wondered about that.
Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't. I might be wrong. I could be wrong.
Limousin also funded Lante, her husband. Lante was an Esperantist. I've never heard of this before I looked at this, which is a socialist. He was a socialist and a writer, and he founded the stateless Association Global that I mentioned earlier, known as SAT, an independent, non-neutral, enlightening global Esperanto association of working Esperantists, which aims to facilitate cross-linguistic and transnational relations between those people who struggle for a world without class or other types of exploitation.
That sounds like a lot of the organisations you've talked about in modern day, doesn't it? You know, like sounds like
World Economic Forum.
Yeah, you know, just with a bullshit title.
Yeah. Listen to this though, Chris. Right, Esperanto is the world's most widely spoken, constructed international auxiliary language, meant for communication between people from all different nations who do not share a common first language.
What does that mean?
That means they're talking like me and you are.
Esperanto.
Well, no. That means they're talking like what we are, but the words mean something totally different.
It's a double speak, basically.
It has been suggested that Orwell included elements of Esperanto in the new speak language he, and our exclamation marks, created in 1984.
Right. So, bloody hell, what is this Esperanto?
Interesting, isn't it? When Orwell visited the couple in Paris, he suffered as a non-speaker of Esperanto and developed a strong dislike for the language. So when he was down and out, but he was sleeping in her Paris apartment, cooking in, slumming it in hotel kitchens, washing up and stuff like that, and slumming out while he was writing his book, making out that he were, and she was funding it.
Yeah, I don't. Like I said, I don't know if that's was public knowledge before that he was funded by a rich auntie. And he was pretending to be down and out. Down and out. I when I read it, I thought he was down and out.
Acting as down and out. I like them words.
Yeah.
The Declaration on the Essence of Esperantism is a basic constitutional document defining the self-understanding of Esperantists and legally establishing the foundation of Esperanto as the linguistic basis of the planned language. I'm not going to go into loads of information on this, but it basically sounded like to me there was a secret organisation that came up with a language that only people of a certain ilk are taught. Now, whether Esperanto's been rebranded as something else, and when Klaus Schwab's talking, he's actually talking Esperanto to all the people, like, again, go back to James Bond when they're in that opera and they've all got them earbuds in, and one guy's talking and telling them what the plan is. It sounds like that. Nobody else can hear it. Or they're talking legalese or whatever.
It could be when any politician does a speech, they immediately understand the Esperanto version of what they're saying. And us clowns just listen to what they're
Nod his
saying.
head.
I mean, on a very basic level, like, we're offering you this. I mean, we read through that now as we don't have to take the offer for certain things.
Yeah. Yeah. It was accepted by the first Universal Congress of Esperanto in Boulogne by the Sea on August 9th, 1905. So this has been around a long time. In the Declaration, one of the 5 points of its objectives was Esperantism is an effort to spread throughout the world the use of the neutral language. An Esperantist is any person who knows and uses the Esperanto language, no matter what the purpose is.
Maybe we should learn it.
Maybe we should learn it. As I said, Lante, who was Orwell's uncle, was the founder of the World Annotational Association, aka Stateless Association Global, and a long-time editor of the internationalist socialist magazine Senaculio, and he was also editor of many other communist publications. I mean, we've seen this a lot, aren't we? I mean, we mentioned before that the CIA and the intelligence services were funding these publications. Lante, apparently suffering from an incurable disease, hung himself with a shower device on January 17th, 1947 in Mexico.
Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah. Don't go for a swim and don't go for a shower.
Don't stay in any hotel bathrooms.
Yeah. And Nelly also appears to be the person who discovered the cottage known as The Stores in Wallington in the countryside of Herefordshire, where Orwell lived between 1936 and 1947. A commemorative plaque was placed there in 1989 by Herefordshire Council. He had married his first wife, Eileen O'Shaughnessy, at St Mary's in the village church, on the 9th of June 1936. Orwell wrote Animal Farm in 1944, probably much of it while he was living within the village at that house. Aunt Nellie knew H.G. Wells very well. H.G. Wells was a student of Thomas Huxley. H.G. Wells taught Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley taught Orwell French at Eton. C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien taught Orwell's first wife, an intelligence operative, Eileen O'Shaughnessy, while at Oxford. I keep reminding us of all these little connections that are going through because, and then you've got the bloodlines going through all these people as well. And yeah, did Huxley and Orwell, and I keep asking myself this, did they know each other? Did they know they were blood relations? Did they? I keep asking this more to myself than anybody else. Nellie Limousin died in June 1950 of a brain hemorrhage from a tumour of the brain. On the death certificate, she is Helen Limousin Adam.
Right.
How many names is that, Chris?
Another name. It's 4 or 5, isn't it?
Yeah. It appears she was cremated. Orwell died 5 months before her in January 1950. There were also magazines like a book and magazines we mentioned like Horizon, which have all the hallmarks of intelligence setups. And they were called to reference and push these new authors coming through and make them stars, really. The Stateless Association Global, the internationalist socialist magazine called Senaculio, and the Statelessness magazine, alongside the Global Esperanto Association, who came up with this new Twilight language. I really need to do some more information, but it sounds very New World Order, World Economic Forum, UN, World Health Organization, World Bank. It's very. You're talking at the early 1900 here. You're talking of all these things popping up prior to World War One, before the UN was even thought of. Yeah, of course. And all of it sounds very sort of fascist, communistic sounding, doesn't it? Where the people are ruled by unknown people behind the scenes, and they can't even understand the language.
Very odd.
Yeah, I doubt very much that these characters escaped the intelligence of, the attentions of the intelligence services. I feel that they were more than that. I think they were more than that. I think, given the full Orwell operation that's unfolding, we're now seeing that all these people that were guiding him, we sort of same with Johnson, didn't we, when he were going to be before he was Prime Minister. He had all these people when he got sacked from Times. He had that Sir Max Hastings, who got him another job, even though he'd been sacked for lying. And then a few years later, Max Hastings comes out and basically said he was a liar and he wasn't fit for being mayor or Prime Minister. I can't remember which job.
Journalists do lie is like the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
You never work as a journalist again.
There'd be no journalists about, would there, if they all got done for lying? Interesting how all these same characters are playing out throughout this shit show. Right, okay. We'll come to a few people who is linked to. I mentioned the Hare family. We'll go through a few of these families that he was linked to. At the beginning of this, I showed a guy called William Wilberforce, who's also got a royal bloodline. The Wilberforce family were politicians from the Midlands. They were also colonial administrators in India. They were also merchants in South Africa. Another part of the family were also wealthy merchants, politicians and philanthropists, and a leader of the movement to abolish the slave trade. They were from Kingston upon Hull in Yorkshire. I think it was Beverley, actually, around that area. Frances Catherine Hare, Orwell's paternal grandmother, was the daughter of Captain Joseph Hare and Sally Hare, but she was a Wilberforce. Sally Hare was the daughter of William Wilberforce Bird, MP, and Penelope Wheeler. Reminds me of Paddington, one of them characters called Bird, in that. Penelope Wheeler was the daughter of Reverend Charles Wheeler, 7th Baron, and Lucy Wheeler. We're talking here around about the late 1700s to mid 1800s here, when these people were around. There have been two noticeable baronesses created under the Weller name, and Weller spelled Wheler. So I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but there you go. That's how I'm seeing it, Weller. So what I'm trying to get to is, they're even these people here filtering out. It's not all about being related to a royal family. Even his spin-off families are aristocrats. Lucy Weller was her maiden name was Strange, daughter of Sir John Strange. Remember, these are direct relations of Orwell's. Sir John Strange was Master of the Rolls and MP for West Love and Totnes. Sir John Strange, 1696 to 1754, was a British politician, judge. In May 1722, he married someone called Susanna Strong, eldest daughter of Edward Strong the Younger, sculptor and mason of St. Paul's Cathedral. They had 2 sons and 9 daughters. This included John Strange Jr., who was an English diplomat and author. The Strong family, Edward Strong the Elder, 1652 to 1724, and Edward Strong the Younger, 1676 to 1741, were the father and son pair of British sculptors mainly working in London in the 17th and 18th centuries. The Strongs came from a long line of masons and quarry owners. They were the son and grandson of Valentine Strong, 1609 to 1662. Valentine Strong built the Sherborne House for Sir John Dutton. Sherborne House was rebuilt in 1829 for John Dutton, 2nd Baron of Sherborne, by British architect Lewis Wyatt. According to the legacies of British slave ownership at the University College London, Dutton was awarded a payment as a slave owner in the aftermath of the Slavery Act, which the Wilberforce worked on, which is a relation of Orwell's. And the Abolition Act was 1833, with the Slave Compensation Act of 1837. The British government took out a £15 million loan worth $1.5 billion in 2023 with interest, and they borrowed that from Nathan Meyer Rothschild and Sir Moses Haim Montefiore, 1st Baron. His contributions are seen as pivotal in the development of Proto-Zionism. So, the actual Slave Compensation Act, they borrowed the money from the Rothschild Bank. You can't, you know, if you really wanted to make this shit up, you couldn't make it up, could you?
It's like another version of the bankers screwing the whole world and then getting paid out by the government. It's like another version of that, isn't it?
Yeah. So they had people in Parliament pushing for the Slave Compensation Act because they knew that, if you think about it, when slaves were first shipped from Africa to Jamaica, for argument's sake, the prices would have been high. But the more slaves they had there, the prices drop. So what they want is to get full money for value for the slaves. So they passed an act to Parliament to get full value for the slaves. They still own the plantations, and the slaves still work there. It's called double bubble.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, the loan was finally paid off in 2015.
Fucking hell. So they were just paying Rothschilds for slave compensation till 2015. That's mental, isn't it? Fucking hell.
I can't even get words out for that.
The only repercussion or the only thing we know about that is that some fucking people knocked some statues over.
Yes.
Which I didn't agree with, by the way, whether they were slave
But is it any wonder they want these statues knocking over?
Well, yeah. So,
wipe it.
Yeah, that's more to the point, isn't it? Just to wipe it out of history.
Wipe it. So they get people angry, they start knocking statues over, and then the slave trade didn't ever happen, did it?
I always think whenever you see a statue, like there was loads in Berlin, we went to Berlin, and there's loads in London, obviously. And I said to my missus, anytime you see a statue of someone, you know they're a bit of a cunt, don't you?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They ain't got it up because they were a righteous, good guy.
No.
Generally, they
well, Orwell's got one at the BBC, hasn't he?
Mm.
Somebody sent us a picture. Apparently, there's a Pied Piper statue near it as well.
Right.
I haven't seen it, but anyway. Back to the Strong family. Edward Strong the Elder's grandfather, Timothy Strong, rebuilt the frontage of Cornbury House. So, again, his family are building these massive country houses, part spin-off from his family, yeah? These are cousins, etc., that are building these massive... One of this, Cornbury Park, is an estate in Shalbury, Oxfordshire. It comprises of 5,000 acres, mostly farmland, and it's the original venue for Cornbury Music Festival and later the Wilderness Festival. It was originally set up by Robin Kaiser, 3rd Baron Rotherwick, and his estate in Oxfordshire, and was given the nickname Poshstock in the national press. David Cameron attended, and his wife Samantha, who we've mentioned before. They all had that royal lineage. So you've got one of George Orwell's family members building the estate hundreds of years ago, right? Mm. Orwell's related to Edward III. So is Cameroon related back to Edward III. His wife, Samantha's got a royal lineage on her own. And they're all attending the same... It's weird, isn't it? It's
family get together.
Family get together. Anyway, Edward Strong the Elder and Edward Strong the Younger was also a mason. Edward Strong the Elder's and his son the Younger led a team of 65 masons that were responsible for many important projects, including the rebuilding of St. Paul's Cathedral and Blenheim Palace. Just to give you an idea who the Strong family were, Edward Strong the Elder had his portrait painted by Sir Godfrey Kneller, 1st Baron, around 1690. Kneller was the leading portraitist in England. Is that the word, that? Portraitist, yeah. In England, during the late Stuart and early Georgian eras, he served as a court painter to successive English and British monarchs, including Charles II of England, George I, etc., etc. The portrait of Edward Strong the Elder is held by the Museum of Freemasonry, based at Freemasons Hall in London. Do you know anybody with a picture in Freemasons Hall, Chris? Freemasons Hall in London is headquartered in the United Grand Lodge of England and the Supreme Grand Chapter of the Royal Arch Masons of England, as well as being a meeting place for many Masonic lodges in the London area. The president of the Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of England is Prince Edward, Duke of Kent. And I said Kent. So this is part of the Weller family, and the Wellers are also related to Sir William Weller, 1st Baron. Born 1611, died 6th of August 1666. He was knighted by the Lord Protector in 1657 and was made a baron by King Charles II in 1660. Baron Weller was a goldsmith. Back to Reverend Sir Charles Weller, 7th Baron. He was the son of Sir William Weller, who was Lucy Weller's grandfather. Lucy Weller was Orwell's great-great-grandmother. That's where all this heads. Sally Bird, or Sally Hare, who originally was a bird, was Orwell's paternal great-grandmother, was the daughter of William Wilberforce Bird. He was the son of John Bird and Judith Wilberforce. He was born in Coventry. William Wilberforce Bird was a cousin of philanthropist William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce, born 1759, helped abolish slavery and helped the Rothschilds get a 1.5 billion loan.
I couldn't say, yes, you're right.
He also descends from King Edward III of England and King Henry I of England. George Orwell, as we've said this before, Julian and Aldous Huxley also descend from Edward III. His eldest son, William Wilberforce Bird II, was the Deputy Governor of the Bengal Presidency and later the acting Governor or Governor General of all of India. The Bengal Presidency was officially the Presidency of Fort William and later Bengal Province. It was a subdivision of the British Empire in India. The officer had direct control of Fort William and also supervised other East India Company officials in India. Fast forward a few decades to Orwell's father working for the opium department, selling opium to the Chinese. Then Orwell becomes a member of the Indian police. He was born in 1784 and educated in Warwick and Geneva before being nominated to join the British East India Company in 1802. So we have part of his family in Burma making ships and teak and doing all sorts of other stuff. His granddad was selling opium, and some of his other family members were working for the East India Company.
You were basically gangsters.
Wilberforce Bird married Hannah Elizabeth Brown in Benares, India on the 11th of August 1818. Brown was the second daughter of David Brown, who was the East India Company chaplain. This is all out there. It's all out there. They're all working for these people. William Wilberforce's sister, Hannah Sumner Bird, mother of John Bird Sumner, who became the Archbishop of Canterbury.
That's some serious power in it, Archbishop of Canterbury.
Remember, these are Orwell's direct descendants. You've got one run in India. You've got one basically part of the East India Company of India and the Archbishop of Canterbury. This is in one small section of a family.
He's basically like the Pope of England, isn't he? Archbishop of Canterbury.
The lower upper middle class. Interestingly, there is a bird baronetcy in Solihull in the county of Warwick, created in 1922 for chemist and food manufacturer Sir Alfred Frederick Bird, the son of Alfred Bird, the inventor of Bird's custard. I'm not sure if they're related though, but they come from the same area, so I can't see there being many of the same name Bird within there who were prominent, if you like. I would say they're related. I didn't dig any deeper, to be honest with you. I thought I'd dug enough there in the Bird family. So this is the one now where we're going to look at the influential Fane family, especially Lady Mary Fane, great-great-grandmother of George Orwell. The Earl of Westmoreland is a title that had been created twice in the peerage of England. The title was first created in 1397 for Ralph Neville. It was forfeited in 1571 by Charles Neville, 6th Earl of Westmoreland, for leading the rising of the North. It was revived in 1624 in favour of Sir Francis Fane, whose mother, Mary Neville, was a descendant of the younger son of the first Earl. The current Earl also holds the subsidiary of Baron Burghersh. Orwell's great-great-grandfather and Jamaican plantation owner Charles Blair was married to Lady Mary Fane. She was the daughter of Thomas Fane, 8th Earl of Westmoreland, born 1701, died 1771. He had his seat in Apethorpe Palace in Northamptonshire. The Earl was an MP for Lyme Regis and Lord Commissioner of Trade. We'll come to his ancestors later. Making Mary Fane Orwell's great-great-grandmother. If we head off in a slightly different direction and just show other ancestorial connections, following this Fane line forward to Anthony Fane, 13th Earl of Westmoreland, born 1859, died 1922, whose wife was Sybil Fane, Countess of Westmoreland. We'll find she was a daughter of Robert Francis St. Clair Eskine, 4th Earl of Roslin, who was a Grand Master Mason. Robert St. Clair Eskine joined Lodge Oswald, there's that name again, Oswald popping up, of Dunikea, together with James Townsend Oswald in April 1867. The Oswald and St. Clairs became dominant forces in Kilcaddy and Dysart. The combined Oswald and St. Clair influence decided who was to be elected. Not much changes, does it? Thomas Townsend Oswald's daughter, Elizabeth, married Thomas Bruce, 7th Earl of Eglin and 11th Earl of Kincardine, member of the formerly royal house of Bruce, into which the Huxley family are also intertwined and married into. Back to Orwell and his great-great-grandmother, Lady Mary Fane. As I said, the 4th Earl of Roslin, Robert St. Clair Eskine, joined the Scottish Masonic Lodge of Oswald of Dunikea, together with James Townsend Oswald. Robert St. Clair Eskine was also Grand Master Mason of the Grand Lodge of Scotland between 1870 and 1873. St. Clair Eskine became Deputy Master of Lodge Canongate in Kilwinning, No. 2, and on the 1st of August 1853. Lord Roslin was also the Grand Master of the modern Masonic Great Priory of Scotland from 1884 until his death in 1890. I'd say we're pretty high up him. Another interesting link in this research, a few names keep cropping up. One of them is Oswald, either as a first or a middle or a surname. It must have been some sort of popular name. Lee Harvey Oswald, in the Chinese zodiac year 1939, is the year of the yellow earth rabbit. JFK, C.S. Lewis, Aldous Huxley died on the same day, 22nd of the 11th, 1963. Oswald died 2 days later, on the 24th of the 11th. Funnily enough, 1963 was also the year of the water rabbit, as is 2023 in Chinese astrology. A sign of the rabbit is a symbol of longevity, peace and prosperity in Chinese culture. 2023 is predicted to be the year of hope. Oswald links into these three, as does the year of the water rabbit. Julia Arnold Huxley, Julian Arnold's mother, met Lewis Carroll as a child, and she and her sister Ethel featured a number of his photographs that we've spoken about. I'm going to go into more detail on that in a later episode. Carroll, Charles Ludwig Dodgson, went on to write Alice in Wonderland with the MK Ultra White Rabbit as its main character. C.S. Lewis also apparently loved rabbits and feature in his work. Lee Harvey Oswald was nicknamed after US cartoon character Ozzy the Rabbit, while in the US Marines, stationed with Kerry Wendell Thornley. If you remember, Kerry Wendell Thornley wrote a book about Oswald prior to the JFK assassination.
Yeah.
Oswald is a surname of a Scottish, Northern English, German / Swiss German provenance. The word Oswald is composed of two Anglo-Saxon elements, Oz meaning God and wield meaning rule or power. This type of link is also interesting. The St. Clairs or Sinclairs are from the same lineage that Justin Trudeau's paternal grandfather James Sinclair, whose ancestors were also attached to the Roslin Chapel, Priory of Sion. The St. Clairs, Sinclairs, Sanclairs, whatever you want to spell it, it's the same people, came over with William the Conqueror. William Sinclair, 3rd Earl of Orkney, Baron of Roslin and 1st Earl of Caithness, claimed to be the hereditary Grand Master of the Scottish Freemasons. He built Roslin Chapel. Later, William Sinclair of Roslin became Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of Scotland, and subsequently several other members of the Sinclair family have held this possession. Justin Trudeau's grandfather, James Sinclair, was born in Crossroads, or a town called Crossroads, Banffshire, Scotland, It was the crossroads where Robert Johnson, blues musician, signed the deal with the devil, or the Faustian bargain. I wonder if Orwell could be in some way related to Justin Trudeau. Just another coincidence, I think.
Yeah, it'd be a shock.
It wouldn't be a shock, no. These ancestors of Orwell show again that the bloodline seems to be a key factor. Like Blackpool Rock, a particular Prometheus bloodline seems to run through these characters. Remember, these are Orwell's great-great-grandmother Fane's direct relations, direct cousins, relations to Orwell. You know, we're not making this up. This isn't made up. This is following the leads back, who's a cousin of a cousin of a cousin. These are people who are related to him. But that's nothing. Every now and again we find things that even as a researcher astound us. And I'm going to show you several things. Firstly, as I've mentioned before, Oswald descends from the Plantagenet king Edward III of England, aka Edward of Windsor, before he was King of England. Orwell descends from this line 8 times, meaning there are 8 different ways back to King Edward III. Orwell is also related to the Plantagenet family via this lineage, who we'll discuss in a bit. That line via his great-great-grandmother Mother Fane also goes back to Edward III's father, or through Edward III's father, Edward II, then through his father, Edward III, grandfather, father, etc. And then to King Henry III, and King John I, and King Henry II. So he's not just related to Edward III, he's related, his great-great-grandparents are all these kings as well. Henry's father was French Geoffrey V, also known as the Handsome, or the Fair, or the Plantagenet. By inheritance, Geoffrey V was the Count of Anjou, Touraine, and Maine from 1129, and also the Duke of Normandy. Interesting, the name Normandy. The Vikings are Norse, or Norse. Mandy, yeah? Norseman, yeah? By conquest in 1144. Geoffrey V's marriage to Empress Matilda, daughter of King Henry I of England, led to the centuries-long reign of the Plantagenet dynasty in England. Geoffrey's ancestral domain of Anjou gave rise to the name Angevin, probably pronounced. Don't go well with Yorkshire, don't French. Nor Japanese. I seem to think that Japanese don't go well with it either. And what modern historians name as the Angevin Empire of the 12th century. These are he's got blood running through these, whether anybody wants to argue that or not. The Angevins from Anjou were the royal house of the Anglo-French origin that ruled England and France in the 12th and early 13th centuries. Its monarchs were Henry II, Richard I, and John. Orwell's line goes back to Fulk V, King of Jerusalem, 1089 to 1092, the Holy Land, also known as Fulk, that's Fulk, the Younger, and he was the Count of Anjou. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, officially known as the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, also known as the Frankish Kingdom of Jerusalem. He died there. He was buried in the Church of the Holy Specula? What's that say, Chris? In Jerusalem. A small room or monument cut into the rock or built of stone, which a dead person is laid to rest or buried. I wonder how much all this nonsense that we're living through goes back to this sort of nonsense, Chris. According to traditions dating back to the 4th century, it contains 2 sites considered holy in Christianity. The site where Jesus was crucified at a place known as Calvary or Golgotha, and contains Jesus' empty tomb, which is where he was buried and resurrected. A marble panel from Fulk V's tomb has a cross patty in its centre, which is a black Maltese cross. So I just want to update on Aunt Nellie limousine. You might remember it was an influential part of Orwell's life, was his Aunt Nellie limousine. And I got this from the theatricalia.com, which is like a theatre website. Just an update on what Elaine Limousine was. She was a feminist, as we mentioned, and a suffragette, and a writer. And she was also an actress. And she was said to have trod the boards of music halls and stages in London as a vaudevillian. She held a lease on a top floor flat in 195 Ladbroke Grove, where from 1911 to 1928, she entertained her suffragette and literary friends. As Elaine Limousine, she appeared in The Disciple by C.K. Munro at Wyndham's Theatre in 1914. And also, I mentioned Werner von Braun, and he's a direct descendant of Edward III. And also, that so is Walt Disney. Walt Disney is descendant of King Edward I, who both from the Plantagenet family, or the House of Plantagenet. And King Edward III is a grandson of Edward I. Who'd have thought that, Chris? I mean, just another odd link. Do these people talk, do you think? No, do they actually think, do you think they actually have a conversation about that we could be distantly related somewhere?
Maybe it's just one big demon head moving the pieces on the chessboard around the world.
And these people don't even know about it. Yeah,
I don't even know anymore. Yeah.
So we're still on the Fanes. This is where it gets into a little bit more detail of Orwell's ancestors. Orwell's great-great-grandmother was Lady Mary Blair Fane, wife of Charles Blair, a wealthy country gentleman born circa 1735. He was an owner of 2 Jamaican plantations, which had 359 African slaves, and the family was compensated by the Slave Compensation Act of 1837 to the total of £7,081. Obviously, we mentioned in the first part of this that the Rothschild Bank lent the British government the money to pay off the slave owners who still owned the plantations and still had the slaves working for them, to the tune of, by 2015, of 1.5 billion.
You had to buy their own lunch.
You had to buy their own lunch, yeah. And interestingly, the Slave Compensation Act of 1837 was campaigned for by William Wilberforce Byrd, MP, and a relative of Orwell's. So he's got slave owners in his grandparents or great grandparents, and a relative of Orwell's was campaigning against slave ownership. You've got to ask yourself who he was actually campaigning for, haven't you? There.
Yeah. Well,
was it benevolent?
Maybe something they knew were coming and they were just getting on board with it. Black Lives Matter style.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean, though? I mean,
yeah, no, I do know what you mean.
Well,
again, I think we mentioned in the first one that if once you have oversaturation of any product, which slaves were products to them, yeah, the value goes down. So if the value goes down, at some point, they're going to be worth nothing, and they will class them as stock. So if they get paid out at a high mark to come off owning slaves, then it's win-win, isn't it?
It's on its way out anyway. We might as well get paid for it.
Exactly, like the train tracks. Let's rip them all up, but we'll spend 800 billion pound, 800 million, I think it was at that point, buying all the private railways out, and then just tear them up. Anyway, that's another story. Orwell's great-great-great-granddad was Thomas Fane, 8th Earl of Westmoreland, son of Henry Fane of Brimpton and Anne Fane. We will return to the Earls of Westmoreland later. Orwell's great-great-great-great-grandma, Anne Fane, her maiden name was Scrope. She was a daughter of Thomas Scrope of Wormersley, circa 1630, and his wife Mary Scrope. Thomas Scrope was the son of Colonel Adrian Scrope, a regicide of Charles I. Colonel Adrian Scrope, also spelt Scroop with a double O, was a parliamentarian soldier during the Wars of the Three Kingdoms, and one of those who signed the death warrant for Charles I in January 1649. Despite being promised immunity after the restoration in 1660 of Charles I, he was condemned as a regicide and executed in October by Charles II. In literature, the execution of Charles III, the term regicide literally means king killing. Second time we've had that in this series, killing of the king, etc., JFK, etc., etc., which was the work of James Shelby Downard and Michael Hoffman who wrote about their ritualistic killing and killing of the king. It's interesting, just that one thing alone in somebody's history would be quite key to mention. And I've never heard that mentioned about Orwell when I've been writing about him, that he's got a direct lineage, whatever you want to call it, back to someone who was hung, drawn and quartered. Right? Not just killed, hung, drawn and quartered in the Tower of London. Why isn't that mentioned? I mean, like I say, if a moron like me can understand it, you've got all these clever academics in Oxford and Cambridge who sing the praises of George Orwell. I'm not, even if they weren't saying he were an intelligence agent or if he existed or not.
Just that it's interesting.
Yeah, that story alone is interesting. So it makes it more interesting, the fact that they don't mention it. In the bits they leave out make you sit up and think they're leaving it out because they don't want people to know this. The restoration of the Stuart monarchy in the kingdoms of England, Scotland and Ireland took place in 1660 when King Charles II returned from exile. Colonel Scroat was hung, drawn and quartered at Charing Cross after the restoration of Charles II. So again, it even adds more depth to it, doesn't it?
Just funny, isn't it? As a side note, where these things happen like that, and like Farringdon, I used to work near Farringdon, where they used to hang people and quarter them, and all these places now, tourists.
Yeah,
you know, just all that horror in the city of London around that area, just all that horror. It's got to be carrying that energy, hasn't it?
Yeah, and also we're not far away from 1666, are we?
No, not really, are we?
We're only, that far, 1660 when this happened, and 1666 when they just burnt it to the ground. A bit like what's going on probably in Palestine at the minute, flattening it to turn it into some other something else, possibly. And also, it's called Charing Cross. I haven't done anything with Charing Cross. I didn't look into Charing Cross, but I mean, you've got to ask yourself about ley lines and things like that. It's not my strong point. I know there's a lot of people that look into this stuff, and it's really something really interesting. I am actually interested in it, and I know you are. The energy is coming out of the ground. I know FPV Angel on his channel, they're really interested in that type of research as well. And it'd be interesting to guess that
somewhere like City of London, Vatican and Washington are riddled, wouldn't you?
I would say so. I'd say that them two, probably Switzerland, mate, possibly as well.
I'm only saying them three because they're them separate country states or whatever they call them, aren't they?
Yeah, and I'd say, I mean, Godvermas talks about a lot of this stuff, doesn't he? The City of London being pivotal to some sort of parasitical energy, that runs the world basically. And you would hazard a guess that there's got to be an element of truth to that. I think is it Washington DC as well? Similar sort of angle to it, and it which is like a country within a country.
Yeah, and the Vatican.
Yeah,
I think all three of them are a place within a place, aren't they?
Yeah,
and they've all got obelisk as well.
Yeah, all got obelisks, all got massive,
and a dome, massive dome obelisk.
Yeah, it's as an addition, the crossroads idea. Edward I's wife died, Eleanor of Castile. Remember, we were talking about the Castiles in the first episode, that they had a direct line lineage, direct descendancy back to Prophet Muhammad. In the year 1290, to commemorate Eleanor, Edward commissioned 3 tombs and had 12 stone crosses built to mark each place where a body rested overnight on its final journey. He employed the best masons in the land to build them. 12 crosses were erected at crossroads, one of them being Charing Cross.
Where are the rest of them then?
Well, I don't know. That's what I mean. I didn't go into the level of detail because it's not really to do with this thing, but this episode. But that in itself, that story in itself, there is compelling to say, well, what on earth? Why would he put 12 crosses? That's some effort to go in to, Following Eleanor's death, her body was taken first to Lincoln, then to London and buried at Westminster Abbey. The term cross, however, really refers to the locations as opposed to the crosses which would have stood at their top. How fitting that a relative of Orwell's was hung, drawn and quartered at a place built for another, the royal ancestors of Orwell's. So they're an ancestor of Orwell's, them 12 crosses, and one of his ancestors was hung, drawn, and quartered at where they built one of those crosses.
I'm guessing the other must be King's Cross.
Quite possibly.
If are they all in London? It's worth a look, actually. Maybe bringing it up later on.
Well, then that throws into the mix all these where the undergrounds go, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And they go. Obviously, you're walking underground to
underground, yeah. And they were built. They were already there, weren't they?
Yes. Yeah. Interesting.
The sewage for Victorians, apparently.
Yeah. If we follow the scope name directly from Anscope and Fainscope, back to 1327, we get to Richard Lescope, first Baron of Bolton, son of Sir Henry Lescope, Lord Chief Justice, Lord Chancellor, and husband of Margaret de Roe. We'll come to the de Roe or de Roe lineage later. If we follow the line via the Scrope name to circa 1045 to around 1100, we find Osborne Fitz Richard, second Baron of Burford, son of Sir Richard Fitz Scrope. So that's another spelling of Scrope. Knight from Normandy, France, circa 1015. Osborne Fitz Richard, second Baron of Burford, was married to a lady called Nest Furch Griffith, Welsh, obviously. Their son was Walter Lescope, circa 1080, and death 1107, and is another direct line back to Orwell. Walter's brother, Hugh Fitz Osborne, third Baron of Burford, and his wife, had a son called Hugh de Say, that's S-A-Y, of Richard's Castle, fourth Baron of Burford. He was the husband of Lucia de Clifford, daughter of Walter Fitz Richard de Clifford, first Baron of Clifford. I'm just trying to show here that it's not just the royal lineage that this guy descends from. He's also got loads of old aristocratic lineage as well. Baron Clifford was the husband of Maud Fitz Walter. Come to the Fitz part in a bit. De Pt3 of Gloucester. Maud Fitz Walter was the daughter of Walter Fitz Roger de Pt3, Sheriff of Gloucester, whose maternal grandfather was Drogo de Boulogne, Lord of Balladoon. Maud Fitz Walter was the sister of Miles Fitzwalter, first Earl of Hereford. This is all round about 1085 to the early 1100s. Back to Walter Fitz Richard de Clifford, or first Baron Clifford. He was the husband of Margaret de Tony, who was the daughter of Raoul IV of Tosnay, the Crunchers of the House of Tosnay, an important noble family in the 10th and 11th century of Normandy. So these are, again, I'll keep saying it, the direct ancestors of Orwell. And this is why when I was looking at Orwell's ancestry, and you look back at how deep and how many people, I've not looked at anybody's ancestry like this, no one's. I'm not saying I'm an expert, but I've looked at a few people's, not, all right, some of them might have be descendants of a royal king or something like that. But these are all over the place, as we're going to find out. Walter de Clifford, known before the 1130s, more confusingly as Walter Fitz Richard, was an Anglo-Norman marcher lord of the Bronil's Castle on the Welsh border, and was a feudal baron of Clifford, seated at Clifford Castle in Herefordshire. Their son was also Walter de Clifford, just to confuse me a lot even more. You find that they're all called the same names. So what happens is when you're looking back, you think there's only one of them, and there's several of them. And he was also a Welsh marcher, feudal baron of Clifford Castle in Herefordshire, and he was also a high sheriff in England. His daughter, Amicia, married Osborne Fitzhugh of Richard's Castle and married into the barons of Burford, who are, as I said, ancestors of Orwell. Another son was Richard de Clifford, known as Lord Frampton VII. Lastly, we have, I'm just giving you some idea of who these people were. Lastly, we have Walter de Clifford's daughter, Rosamond de Clifford. She was the lover, stroke mistress, of King Henry of England, King Henry II of England, who ruled from 1133 to 1189. Also called Henry Fitz-Empress and Henry Plantagenet, King of England from 1154, until his death in 1189. And he's also an ancestor of Orwell's.
Only 35.
I know. A lot of these people died in battle. They had an illegitimate daughter, Rosamund de Clifford and Henry II. She was called Rosamund Fitzhenry. She was half sister of Geoffrey, who was the Archbishop of York. So Orwell, I think we've mentioned somebody else who was Archbishop in Orwell's ancestry, and we've got another Archbishop. He's also related to the third Earl, the Earls of Salisbury, William the Ninth, Count of Poitiers, Henry the Young King, Geoffrey II, Duke of Brittany, Philip, Prince of England, Eleanor of England, who was Queen Consort of Castile, who we mentioned earlier, Joan Plantagenet of England, who was Queen of Sicily, John Lackland, or King John of England, Matilda of England, who was Duchess of Saxony, Richard the Lionheart, King of England, and Morgan, Bishop of Durham.
Right, you can imagine that in them days, bishops and what's it like, will have had probably as much clout as a king, haven't they?
Well,
to the people, I mean.
Yeah, well, just as much, because generally what happened, Chris, is when you look at these, if you look at some of the people, the first son, the second son, first son became king, second son were Prince of Wales, for argument's sake.
Yeah.
Third son became Archbishop of Canterbury.
Yeah.
So they had everything covered.
They're all controlling it.
Yeah. Remember, this is all via Orwell's ancestry back to Osborne Fitzrichard, second Baron of Burford, via his wife, Nest Virch Griffith, which I've just probably destroyed there. I know Welsh people will be onto me. If you're watching this video presentation, I'll be showing this probably on Genie, flicking through so you can see where it comes from Orwell all the way down to these influential people. And if we follow Thomas Fane, 8th Earl of Westmoreland, who was born in 1701 and died in 1777, and Anne Fane, who was the scope at the beginning of this episode. These are the great-great-grandparents of George Orwell. Anne Fane Scope was the daughter of Thomas Scope, who are the fourth or fifth generation grandparents of Orwell. And as I mentioned, I'm just recapping here, Adrian Scope, regicide of, who was hung, drawn and quartered for putting Charles I to death. I found that Charing Cross bit very interesting. I would keen on looking into more detail in that one. Even the fringes of this, the branches off, are all royal or some sort of important people. I can't believe, right, that someone didn't know this when they're plucking Orwell out of nowhere to become the author in 1984. Just like we'll show when we finally get round to doing the Huxley's ancestors, that they were academics and also part of leading lineages. I'm going to jump forward now to the de Ross family. I mentioned Margaret de Ross earlier. Her first husband was Baron Thomas de Musgrave, and First Lord Musgrave. Her first husband's line goes back to Lord Gamel of Musgrave, circa 1030. He's got no direct line to Orwell, though. Her second husband was Henry Le Scrope. This is where he has got a direct line. Lord Chief Justice, second husband of Margaret. Margaret was the daughter of William de Roe, first Baron, and he's from first Baron in Yorkshire. So it might have been like the Roe, ROS might have been Rose. And her mother was Margaret de Vaux, Baroness Rose. William de Ross, first Lord of Hemsley, and joint Lord and Warden of Scotland, son of Robert de Roe, Lord of Belvoir, and his wife Isabel d'Aubigny, heiress to the Belvoir Castle and daughter of William IV, the Lion of d'Aubigny, Lord of Belvoir. These are direct descendants of Orwell's. William was the son of William III, Brito de Aubigny, Lord of Belvoir, surety of the Magna Carta, meaning he was a witness to the Magna Carta signing.
Right, yeah.
With King John first, who was another ancestor of Orwell's. So you've got people who have lines back to the signing. I mean, the Magna Carta. I mean, quite a big thing that in history, wasn't it? To be a witness there. Imagine what have we ever witnessed like that?
Maybe someone opening a supermarket or something. 80s.
Yeah. These are all ancestors of Orwell. All of them. This is the one that got me, right? We're coming to the point where these are the parts that sort of kept me awake. Orwell's relationship to Nest Furch Griffith and Lady Godiva. So Osborne Fitzrichard, second Baron of Burford, and his wife Nest Furch Griffith, 1055, born 1055. As I said, Nest Furch Griffith was the daughter of Griffith ap Llewellyn, who was born 1010, died 1063. He was the King of Wales from 1055 to 1063. And his wife was Eldegyth. Eldegyth was the daughter of Alfgar, Earl of Mercia. Alfgar was the son of Leofric III, Earl of Mercia, who was the son of Leofwine, Ealdorman of Hawaii, who witnessed the charter of King Ethelred II. Leofric is most remembered as being the husband of Lady Godiva. Godiva's name occurs in the charters of the Domesday Survey. These are all direct descendants. Now, I'm sure there are other people that are related to them, but they haven't gone on to write influential books either. Eldegarth was the mother of Nesfert Griffith. Eldegarth's first husband was Griffith ap Llewellyn, King of Wales. Her second husband was Harold Godwinson, King of England, known as King Harold II, who was killed in 1066 at the Battle of Hastings by William the Conqueror.
The arrow in his eye. That was that guy, wasn't it?
Eldegyth had a child with King Harold called Harold Haraldson. Nesfert Griffith was the half-sister of Harold Haraldson, stepdaughter of King Harold. The kings of Britain. That's who he's related to.
Get the impression as well. It was probably an easier place to run. If you were part of these prominent families, like you said, you've got an archbishop here and a king here, there won't have been as many people running the show, would there?
No.
You know what I mean?
No.
Like now.
No, it's certainly got more, which is probably why we're going through what we're going through, Chris. Technology's taking over. We don't need as many people.
We need a little wipeout.
Yeah.
They probably did it. Well, would you be surprised if they did it a number of times? Black Death.
No. Whatever they were.
A lot of people will have lived in London at the time, weren't they?
Yeah. 1666 fire. Yeah. If we go from Orwell through his paternal line, as far as Charles Blair, the Jamaican plantation owner, and husband of Lady Mary Blair, maiden name Fane, and follow her father, Thomas Fane, 8th Earl of Westmoreland, then we follow his line from Anne Fane, maiden name Scope, through to her father, Thomas Scope, Colonel Adrian Scope, all the way to Sir Henry Le Scope, 6th Baron Scope of Bolton, and his wife, Elizabeth Scrope. Elizabeth Scrope, maiden name Percy, daughter of Henry Percy, 3rd Earl of Northumberland, son of Eleanor Neville, Countess of Northumberland, daughter of Joan Burford, Countess of Westmoreland, daughter of John of Gaunt, who was a Plantagenet. He was the first Duke of Lancaster and 1st Earl of Richmond, and son of Edward III. So Edward III is the 14th grandfather, if you like, of George Orwell. 14th line. So it's his great time, his granddad times 14. And he's obviously the son of Edward III, Edward II, who was the son of Edward I, who was the son of Henry III, son of John I, son of Henry II. These are all Orwell's descendants. And you can go back and back and back with that. And that sort of concludes his lineage. But you can see it's deep, can't you, Chris? The lineage there is deep. And I know
just to clear, like a few people have said to you, that we all descend from these people, but we don't, do we?
No.
It's funny actually, because I remember seeing a documentary years ago about, and they were kind of trying to poo-poo this kind of thing then by saying they got all these people together, and the conclusion was we're only 5 generations away from being related.
Well, I don't see how that's possible, because
it can't be true, can it?
Well, that would say that Edward III and his wife and his lovers are the
well, in the thing I'm on about, they even had like black. They had like a guy who was black, a guy who was Japanese, a guy who was this and that, and they all said that they were solidly 100% ancient Japanese, ancient African. You know,
yeah.
But then they made out they did a DNA thing, and they said no, but you're only like 7 generations. I can't remember what the number was. But was that trying to I don't know, muddy the water, if you like? Because then it's become like we spoke with James yesterday. It's become an urban myth, hasn't it, that everyone's related to everybody?
Well, again, if
I don't personally believe that's that simple, because while we've got black, Chinese, all these different nationalities, it doesn't really weigh up, does it?
Well, it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't make sense unless you believe in Adam and Eve, or you believe that we crawled out of the primordial mud.
Yeah.
And there was just one person at one point in that particular thing, and or some miracle happened, and there were 2 people actually happened at the same time climbing out the primordial mud. Or
the primordial mud didn't make any sense either, does it?
Just nonsense, isn't it? It's nonsense, Chris. It's nonsense.
I've never
to steer you away from the real happening, which is something totally different. The manufacture of human or humanoids. Maybe we are humanoids, and we just call ourselves humans. But I mean, that's a whole different conversation. But that it would mean that Edward III, and however many women he had children with, for argument's sake, at that particular point, he was the only person alive, or his descendants were the only people alive, or his direct descendants, like his mum, dad, his grandma and granddad, that type of descendant, or they were the only ones having children.
Yeah. And
then at some point they allowed everybody to do it.
Yeah, because what about all this peasant class that were around?
Yeah. So you're telling me Edward III is directly related to an Aborigine?
Yeah. Yeah, It didn't balance up. You'd have to think about it for very long, does it? Yeah.
No. So what they do say, if you follow the logic, is that Orwell's related to all these people. Not everybody are related to all these people. So we don't follow the same ancestors back. That's quite obvious. It's quite obvious. That don't mean to say that someone won't have the Duke of Lancaster or something like that in there as one of their ancestors.
Not that many. All.
No. And also, if you look at these prominent people that we've looked at, and I'm not cherry picking people, I'm coming across this stuff, I could say by accident. I didn't expect to find all this stuff on Orwell. I was looking at more the intelligence angle on Orwell, and this came out by surprise. That's why it's turned into 4 episodes on their own, or 4.5, or whatever you want to call it, simply because there's so much. And when you look at the Huxleys, it's the same thing, and it's called the Huxleys' Brave New World Order, and you look at their ancestors, and you see that, some of them invented stadium sport, some of them were poets and authors, some of them, yada, yada, yada.
All society-changing events.
All society-changing and controlling events, things that control people. And then they go on to write about control. And it's never told to anybody. When we were told about George Orwell at school, nobody told us that he were related to, even just related to King Edward III.
I don't think they even brought up his upbringing. In fact, all you ever heard about him was he wrote for Yorkshire Post and he went to fight in the Spanish Civil War.
Yeah, they never mentioned that they sold his rights to his book to the CIA, or he worked for intelligence services.
No, I think they mentioned he was in India as well.
They cherry pick out the bits that they wanted to concentrate on. Fought in Civil War, that means he was a left winger. He went to India and he was in Indian police. That means he's a good guy.
Felt guilty about killing an elephant.
Yeah, etc. And he lived down and out in Paris and London when really were funded by his rich auntie, and lived at her house.
But even at that point, that could be something a rich kid would do.
100%.
Just to write,
100%.
Like we've discussed before, did he do all that stuff and then someone wrote 1984 for him.
Well, we've been
or directed him how to write it, or whatever.
We have discussed this, that 1984 was a total, again, like the Beatles, that wrote all them Love Me Do nonsense songs, and all of a sudden they started composing music and writing that were totally abstract from the first generation of Beatles music. And Orwell and Aldous Huxley have to say that Aldous Huxley's Brave New World was totally different from anything he'd written before. But more so George Orwell. It was totally different. His writings before were like Fly on the Wall.
For essays and, like experiences.
Yeah. But 1984 and Animal Farm looked like they were written by a group of people with knowledge far and above what anybody could actually have, as in knowledge of future events.
Well, was it one of the very early, like literally a reveal, Yeah,
and at a time where people wouldn't have actually believed a reveal, because he were releasing it, remember, at the end of World War II, or around that time, he wrote them within World War II, around that time. And so people at that time wouldn't have twigged that he were writing something like 70 years in advance, would it?
You would think even people who had a slightly conspiratorial mind back then, when they didn't agree with the state or whatever, they wouldn't have ever thought that maybe that's the plan. And I don't think anyone would have thought that, would they?
No, impossible. Just similar to the Matrix movie. Is somebody going to be in what 70 years time doing a podcast, doing research on the Matrix movie, and they realize that everybody's being used for energy extraction?
Yeah,
it'd be the same thing, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
be exactly the same thing. How did they know that somebody be writing like we are now, saying, and also they were the first ones to two brothers at different ages become transvestite or go through the trans change, and they're writing an energy draining film.
It's a good film.
It's a very good film, the first one. Yeah, very good film. But yeah, so to finish off this part, we're going to talk about the Orwell Society. It's interesting how these things just spring up just to keep the story going, and by people who are quite very intelligent people. They're not, well, other gatekeepers are intelligent people, that's another thing. But if the whole thing's an intelligence setup, then they're going to have intelligence people looking after the story, aren't they?
Yeah.
So the Orwell Society is probably another one of those societies like we've been throughout these 6 or 7 episodes now, that's going to be funded or come to light that in another few years it was some sort of MI5, MI6 CIA setup. Anyway, the Orwell Society is a literary society and a UK registered charity. It was founded in 2011 with the aim of promoting and understanding and appreciating the life and work of George Orwell, aka Eric Blair. He isn't even called George Orwell. Its patron is Richard Blair, George Orwell's adopted son. The society has no political... There we go with the adoption part again. The society has no political affiliations, and does not speculate on what Orwell might have thought of current political issues were he alive today. Well, I thought it was left-wing.
I was going to say, why not as well?
Yeah, well, I thought it was going to be left-wing communist, even though he worked for government intelligence services. Is that why they don't want to get into it? In 2004, Dion Venables of Finlay Publishers published a revised edition of Eric and Us, a memoir written by Jacintha Boudicom, who died in 1994. Boudicom was Venables' first cousin, who left Venables the copyrights to the book in her will. The book was originally published in 1974 by Leslie Freewin and focused on Eric Blair's childhood and teenage years. Jacintha Boudicom was an English poet and childhood friend of Eric Blair, George Orwell. She met Blair in 1914 and they developed a shared interest in poetry, but lost touch with him after he departed for Burma and the Indian police in 1922. It was not until 1949, a few months before Orwell's death, that Boudicom realised that George Orwell was the author of Animal Farm and was her childhood friend, Eric Blair. So he'd written all these books. Right, this is how famous he wasn't and how famous Animal Farm became in, 1949. She met Orwell, 9 at the time, and his young sister, Avril, and became close friends with them. Her younger brother and Boudicom's younger brother and Boudicom's younger sister. Blair enjoyed shooting at 9-year-old, fishing and bird watching, while with Jacinta. And he preferred to read and write poetry and dream of future intellectual adventures. No amateur watercolorist then. There. Orwell told Boudicom that at some point he might write a book in the style similar to that of H.G. Wells's A Modern Utopia.
When he was 9, he told her that, did he?
Well, he met her at 9. Whether he was 9 at that point, I don't know.
Well, no, he met her at 9 in 1914, and then he departed in 1922. So 12 years later.
Yeah, anywhere in between that. He could
up to his 20s, I suppose,
yeah. Jacinta Boudicom's own father emigrated to Australia in 1920 and changed his name from Robert Arthur Boudicom to Robert Arthur Bedford. We've seen a lot of these name changes in this.
I've never met anyone who's changing them.
No. Oh, I've known one person.
Yeah, one.
Yeah, but that was for a particular reason. But yeah, don't know anybody really.
These seems to do it left, right, and centre, don't they?
Yes, and they've got more than one sometimes. Boudicom gave an account of the relationship with Orwell in her memoirs, Eric and Us, published in 1974. Boudicom disputed Orwell's writings about his own childhood. Jacinta Boudicom's own father, as I said, emigrated in 1920. Boudicom gave an account of the relationship in Eric and Us. Boudicom's cousin, Dion Venables, also known by a pen name DJ Finlay, was an English novelist and publisher who co-founded the Orwell Society. In 2006, Venables created Finlay Publishing with the aim of promoting the life works of the writer George Orwell. Finlay Publishers' first act was to print a new edition of Eric and Us, adding an important postscript written by Venables based on a series of previously unpublished diaries, letters, and documented interviews, and added a postscript to the memoir in 2006, suggesting that the real reason for the ending of the Blair-Boudicom relationship was a possibility that Blair, in an attempt to further their relationship, may have tried to rape Boudicom.
Oh, God, that got dark quick.
Yes. Venables recalled that there was an incident in 1921 in which Boudicom shouted, screamed, and kicked before running home after Blair made advances on her. This interaction left her with a torn skirt and a bruised hip, apparently. The Orwell Society was inaugurated by Dion Venables at Phyllis Court, 27th of December 2010. Phyllis Court is a private members club in Henley-on-Thames, Oxfordshire, England, situated by the River Thames. Interestingly, just to keep up with the Orwell Secret Intelligence Service links, Dion Venables' father, as I say, Alan Gordon Finlay, who won the Military Cross, was a British engineer and inventor. He worked on top secret British tank technology during World War One. His lifelong friend was Philip Joubert, aka Chief Marshal Philip Bennett Joubert de la Ferte. French and Yorkshire go well together, don't they, Chris? Senior commander in the Royal Air Force during the 1930s and the Second World War, whom he met while at boarding school in Switzerland. Alan Gordon Finlay was, according to Wikipedia, by 1913, missing from the army lists and may have returned to England, having decided to change his career by entering the diplomatic service. This is a smoking gun to the intelligence service training. In 1917, Professor Finlay was invalided out. of the army and was appointed Chief of Service to the Inter-Allied and Anglo-American Commissions in Paris 1918 to 1919. He's best known for having created the Finlay simultaneous interpretation system at the League of Nations in Geneva after the First World War. This was the first of its kind and the forerunner to the modern interpretation systems in use throughout the world today. You see them with the, a patent was purchased by IBM in 1930, taking it to global production. Finlay collaborated with the Bell Telephone Company, which has also appeared in this series quite a lot, to manufacture component parts, including his own innovations like the Strethophone, a kind of early earbud fitted with the pneumatic ear pads, circa 1927, and for the first time, automatic voice recording. He also worked for English Electric, which was a weapons company and merged with General Electric and Marconi in 1968. During World War II, Finlay joined Maurice Buckmaster from a secret address at the Fountain Court in Belgravia. Colonel Maurice James Buckmaster, OBE, was the leader of the French section of Special Operations Executive. After World War II, he worked for the Ford Motor Company, this Buckmaster. By October 1943, Alan Gordon Finlay was sent to the super-secret Bletchley Park of Enigma code-breaking fame. And just to add to this, his first daughter, June, in early 1944, was also transferred to Bletchley Park to work on the Enigma program. Father and daughter were working in the same location under completely different commands. In June of that year, his wife Florence and his second daughter, Dion, who we've been talking about it, were buried in the remains of a house they were living in after it was hit by a V-1 flying bomb. Finlay left Bletchley Park in 1946. Around this time, so Reginald Victor Jones, so this is the woman who started up the Orwell Society. This was her father. We're talking about now. So this guy, Professor Finlay, hence Finlay Publishers, was the father. So he's now in the diplomatic service. He's inventing secret technologies with tanks, first earbuds, first recording, voice recording online with Marconi, etc., etc. And he's also now working with Maurice James Buckmaster, who was leader of the French SOE, which turned into MI6, right, after World War II. Around this time, so Reginald Victor James started making regular calls to Finlay's Kensington Court apartment, becoming a close family friend. Jones was a British physicist and scientific military intelligence expert who played an important role in the defence of Britain in World War II by solving scientific and technical problems. His extensive use of deception to deceive the Germans is consistent with the term disinformation, which is defined as a deliberate planting of false information and the physical evidence to lead an opponent astray. In 1993, he was the first recipient of the R.V. Jones Intelligence Award, which the CIA created in his honour.
Right, yeah.
These were the friends of Alan Gordon Finlay, Air Chief, which were Air Chief Marshal Sir Philip Benet Joubert de la Ferte and two intelligence officers, which now raises questions about the Orwell Society, given that Finlay's daughter founded it. The Orwell Society owns the statue of Orwell, sculptured by Martin Jennings, outside Broadcasting House, quarters of the BBC in London. The wall behind the statue is inscribed with an Orwell quote. The quote is from an unused preface for Animal Farm called The Freedom of the Press. The quote says, "If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear." I'll repeat that. If liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear.
You can literally read that in two ways, can't you?
I knew you were going to say that. I just knew it.
Classic Orwellian doublespeak.
Yeah. It is, isn't it?
Yeah, quote from the BBC.
Quote
Gives
from
us
the
the right
BBC.
to tell you what you don't want to hear, even though it's bollocks.
Yeah, exactly.
Mad that, isn't it? Yeah, I never thought of it like that before.
Isn't that what we're living through? Liberty, the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one's way of life, behaviour, or political views. That's what the word liberty means. Liberty, the power or scope to act as one pleases, or as one's controlled to please yourself. If you think about it, right, these words like liberty, to be free, I mean, what is freedom? I think Master Lee spoke about that. You don't actually want freedom because that is what these dark occultists want. They want to be able to do, which is what's happening, isn't it? On the 30th of September 2022, the Royal Mint unveiled sculptor Martin Jennings' design for the obverse portrait of King Charles III for Britain's coinage. So this guy who did the Orwell sculpture, right, is also doing the picture of Charles that's going on the coins. Sculptor Martin Jennings was apprenticed to Richard Kindersley, whose father was David Kindersley, MBE. David was educated at St. Cyprian's School, where Orwell and Cyril Connolly went. David Kindersley was the son of Major Guy Molesworth Kindersley, probable MI5 from my research, but anyway. Major Kindersley married Kathleen Agnes Roden Elton, who was the daughter of the arts and crafts potter Sir Edmund Elton of the Elton Baronetcy and of Bristol, and he was the 8th Baron of Clevedon Court, or their seats at Clevedon Court. David Kindersley's second wife is Lydia, I think she's still alive, Lida Lopez Cardozo Kindersley, MBE. I think she might be from Batley. No. Her works include the ledger stone for the grave of William Blake at Bunhill Fields. We mentioned Blake in an earlier episode. He was the precursor to free love in the 60s generation. With David Kindersley, Leader designed the main gates for the British Library. I mean, these aren't small things, these are.
These are all good jobs, aren't they?
Yeah.
If you're doing that well.
She designed the sundials on public buildings, including Selwyn College and Pembroke College at Cambridge. Her works also include the ledger stone for the grave, as I said, of William Blake, and work for EMI and Shell Oil. So these are the people who, going back generations, have built this Orwell sculpture, the opening the Orwell Society. I found this interesting as well. You might find this interesting being an artist, right? Richard Kindersley was a British stone carver and typeface designer. The nave of Dunblane Cathedral has a standing stone in memorial to the Dunblane massacre by the monumental sculptor Richard Kindersley. Pardon?
I said bloody hell.
No. Dorling Kindersley Limited, branded DK, is a British multinational publishing company specialising in illustrated reference books for adults and children in 63 languages. It is part of the Penguin Random House, a subsidiary of German media conglomerate Bertelsmann, who we've mentioned before. DK works with licensing partners such as Disney, Lego, DC Comics, and the Smithsonian Institution. The family runs Sheep Drove Organic Farm in Berkshire with 2,250 acres, and UK organic health and beauty company Neil's Yard Remedies. Many of the street signs in the UK, including streets in Cambridge, use the Kindersley fonts.
Just a license to print cash, that, isn't it? Isn't it though? If you own the fonts, you get a touch every time. This is an eye into how these families make the money, because they just get given golden tickets for everything. I mean, the gates to the British Library, how much do you reckon?
I don't know. But
No,
they're there forever, aren't they? As well.
Well, it's not just that though, but you know the guy who's giving you that contract, and he wants to give you that touch. You know, it's just internal backpatting, isn't it? An internal. Yes. It's almost like money laundering, isn't it? Really?
Yeah. Martin Jennings. So the guy who we're talking about here, who sculptured Orwell, right? Martin Jennings also sculptured Sir Edward Heath. So yeah, I mean, this is going to end the Orwell series within the series, if you like, because we need to move on to other stuff. Simply because there's a lot of other stuff to cover, and it's interesting. It's really interested in research from my perspective. I'm sure Chris likes it going through some of these because some of these people, I mean, he's read more of these people than I have. Orwell, Huxley, and a lot of the other people we speak about.
It's only because I wanted to think I was clever.
Well, you were interested in their books as well.
No, I was. Yeah, I've got like 3 copies in 1984. I told you I've got a folio one of it. Someone bought me. My missus bought me actually.
So it's a question we get asked a bit after doing these, Chris. If Orwell was actually a real individual. I mean, it's a difficult one to answer without guessing, I think, still, even with all this information.
Well, it's pure guesswork, isn't it? I mean, I would hazard a guess, a bit of both. He was a real person at one time, and then maybe was used, his name was used just as an author to write those books. I mean, in them days, he could have died 5 years before they're telling you. We will never know, will we? Because
if he did go to Spain, he could have died in Spain.
Anywhere. Yeah. One thing for sure is there's not many photos of him, as we've talked about loads of times, but no audio, no video.
Yeah.
And like you said, they made it clear there that he didn't get actually famous till Animal Farm.
Yeah.
So maybe they took an obscure, what we think was an obscure author, and then used those books. Used him to write those books.
We've seen it with Shakespeare.
Yeah.
If they can carry on with that nonsense for hundreds of years.
And also, as good as 1984 is, and as it's still in every school, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it? I don't know why have something about a dystopian future in every school. Is it that whole thing where they're trying to make all these children manifest their evil plan? You think if you've got everyone reading it at the same time, all through school, analysing it, whatever, you're seeing that future, and then maybe that's what make the future materialise. I don't know.
Yeah,
manifest itself.
Right. It spoke about Newspeak and that Esperanto language that we spoke about in episode
look
6.
At that Esperanto language.
And we don't know what's coded into these books, do we?
No.
If the CIA are making the animated film,
yeah,
right, and he's working for the intelligence. I think one thing that is clear is Orwell was a controlled British intelligence operative. To me, that's quite bleeding obvious. His 2 wives were worked for the intelligence operations. You can't have all these people surrounding you and not be part of intelligence, even down to somebody who sculptured who did his sculpture about 70 years after he's been born, and somebody who set the Orwell Society up, were all surrounded by intelligence operatives.
And like I said before, if there's a sculpture of you, there's a story there, isn't there? Whether you were an evil murderer.
The story is in that phrase. Yeah. The story is in that phrase. At the very least, his persona was a construct. The early books, like we said, were gritty novels, and his 2 big releases, Animal Farm and 1984, they were totally different. They were chalk and cheese from his early stuff, reminding me of the Beatles about turning their musical skill set from their early love nonsense to their more musically challenging releases, like Mike Williams of Sage Quay covered so brilliantly. The evidence is clear. The character Orwell, and I use that term loosely, worked for the intelligence services. His most famous books were used by British intelligence and the CIA and other intelligence services, no doubt, as propaganda on their own populations, and it's still happening today. Every time a child reads that book in school, it's propaganda. It's the CIA. It's MI6.
Again, they're filled with a lot of truth, though.
All lies have to have truth, otherwise they're hard to believe, aren't they?
Well, you can't describe them as lies because they're fiction, aren't they? But it's a lot of revelation and method in there, isn't there?
But if there's truth in there, there's lies in there. You can't have truth without lies. You understand where I'm coming from? His books are still used on school children. Orwell worked as a propagandist for the BBC. That's advertised. It's there. It says he worked as a propagandist for the BBC during World War II. That's on his own. That's on the Orwell website. Yeah, delivering propaganda during World War II. And
because it's for World War II, people see that as a heroic thing.
Yeah,
but it wasn't, because what you say when you're saying release propaganda on his own populace is he was lying to his own people.
Yes,
to get him to do what he wanted. That's what propaganda is.
Yeah.
It's not a good thing, whether it's World War II or what.
To get him to believe something were worse than it is, or better
exactly.
than it is, or whatever
it's
it
making you do something you don't want to do, like we've
Exactly.
seen over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. And he also worked for the Ministry of Information, and his second wife worked for the Ministry of Information. I mean, that should tell you something in itself. That in itself should make, I don't believe who Orwell is, that one thing there. Forget everything else that we've wrote about. Him working for the Ministry of Information, right? Or his book being used by the CIA should tell you who this person or entity or mythology is.
The fact that you found them, and like you say, when people talk about it, none of those things are mentioned.
No.
One of the things I found interesting was that woman's poem, 1984 poem. That was an interesting.
Oh, that was, but that's another one, isn't it?
What does that mean?
The 1980 Eileen O'Shaughnessy writes a poem called 1984, and it has got another sentence to it, but it's got 1984 in it, and it's based in 1984.
And it's before she ever met him.
Before she, apparently, even though she worked for the. Yeah, she worked for the Ministry of Information. Anyway, she worked for another clandestine operation during World War II. Orwell, like so many Lifetime actors, also, the story reminds me of the Bitcoin story, Chris, and its inventor, Satoshi Nakamoto, a figment of someone's imagination. Like his name, it means Central Intelligence in Japanese. you know what I mean? It just reminds me of that.
But they could have done that without doing that, but they had to do that.
They have to do that. They have to take the piss. They have to take the piss. Orwell created Orwell's list for the IRD, which was a secret Cold War propaganda department of the British Foreign Office, created to publish anti-communist propaganda, including black propaganda, which is a form of propaganda intended to create the impression that it was created by those it is supposed to discredit. Black propaganda consists with grey propaganda, which does not identify its source, as well as white propaganda, which does not disguise its origins at all. It is typically used to vilify or embarrass the enemy through misrepresentation. This is who Orwell worked for. And now everyone's saying his books are brilliant. The IRD promoted works by not just by Orwell, but by presumably other anti-communist authors. And Orwell were meant to be a communist, including George Orwell, Arthur Colster, CBE, and Bertrand Russell, 3rd Earl Russell. It's not just about George Orwell. Bertrand Russell descends from King James II, King of Scotland and Ireland, and also King Charles I of Scotland and Ireland. And he also descends Pope Felix V, a.k.a. Amadeus VIII. He was Count of Savoy and later Duke of Savoy. The IRD promoted work by Robert Conquest, OBE. In 1948, Conquest joined the Foreign Office Information Research Department, a propaganda counter-offensive unit. Daniel Day-Lewis. His father worked there, the Information Research Department.
The shoemaker.
The shoemaker, yeah. Both of Orwell's wives worked for the intelligence service. Eileen O'Shaughnessy worked for the censorship department of the Ministry of Information in London. In 1934, she wrote a poem like we were talking called End of the Century, 1984. She wrote this in 1934, 50 years in advance, which mentions in the poem Aldous Huxley. This was a year before she met Orwell. She was a trained psychologist interested in testing intelligence in children. Sonia Bromwell worked for the Information Research Department, a propaganda department, as we mentioned, which helped increase the international fame of Animal Farm in 1984. With her support, the IRD was able to translate Animal Farm into 16 languages in over 14 countries for propaganda purposes. Soon after her husband's death, Sonia sold the rights to Animal Farm to the CIA. This deal resulted in the creation of the propaganda film Animal Farm, which became the first feature-length animated film in Britain. So far, we have discovered that Orwell shares the bloodline of Prophet Muhammad. He descends from Edward III 8 times. He shares this with Sir Julian and Aldous Huxley, and Sir Charles Darwin, and many, many more. He descends Edward III's bloodline 8 times. Mainstream genealogists would as all believe that we are all related. I have heard professional genealogists say that if they had all the available data, they could link every human back to the Disney story of Adam and Eve, or the primordial soup nonsense, for examples. To accept that explanation, you have first got to believe the scientific theories we are bombarded with. That would mean that Aborigines are related to Eskimos. But this doesn't make sense, like most of the mainstream gibberish. And it doesn't answer the obvious question either, as to how all these influential people throughout history are all probably related to each other. Is it by chance? That chance is impossible. And the theories rolled out are what they say they are just theories, because that is Operation Mockingbird. Hidden compartmentalization. The majority of the protagonists don't even know they're being used by the 100th monkey. Even after his death 70 plus years ago, they're still keeping up the pretense that Orwell was an organic literary genius. As Mark Devlin says, their parents are never plumbers, are they? We can add another line to that great sentence. Neither are their ancestors. And on that note, we'll see you later. Stay tuned for the next of the Huxley's Brave New World Order. See you soon. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
I will grow old, then I will die. I'll be a part of the oceans and sky. When I was young, before my